Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking with Jay Shapiro again. Just quick background, Jay is a documentary filmmaker. Most recently did Islam and the Future of Tolerance. And I was going to speak to him today about his perspective on anti-Semitism, especially relating to the recent cartoon in the New York Times that everyone was freaking out about. So, hey, Jay, thanks for coming back. And if you want to take the floor.
Yeah, no, it's good to be back. It's always fun talking to you. So take the floor on anti-Semitism. That's a big one. I guess, we'll start framing the conversation because you and I have had a couple little back and forths on it. That my concern, I'll start with my concern. My overall concern that I think people can see and relate to and maybe as an on-ramp to what this conversation might be is the concern about inventing or identifying a blasphemy taboo. In this case, a taboo against a specific kind of criticism of a specific motivation in the Israel conversation, and even more specifically, how that relates to the U.S.'s role in it. I know that was a lot of specifics on a very narrow thing, but I think that's the on-ramp of I fear that there is a taboo there at the moment that has become impossible to criticize. So I've been poking some people and poking the bear a little bit, as it were, in this particular conversation. And I think where this may go, I'm gonna let you lead it and tell me where maybe more specifically you want me to start. But I think what it demands is me talking about a bit of my experience as growing up, as what it means to be an American Jew, in just my personal experience in a post-Holocaust world. Now I'm, I guess, a third-generation American who grew up in an American suburb in a what's called conservative Jewish movement, which is very different than something like when you hear conservative politics. It's sort of the lukewarm water between the very hot Orthodox version of it and the very cool, diluted Reform version of it. It's in the middle somewhere. I could talk about that. I don't think my experience is unique at all. And so this hunch that I have, thinking that there must be other people out there like me who grew up in this tradition who are also feeling a little frustrated with the moment, is where this is going to go. So it's a warning to sort of people listening that I might, maybe not a warning, but it's saying I'm going to be talking about my own life a little bit and then trying to relate that to this maybe bigger philosophical fear.
No, that's perfectly fine, because I have a friend of mine in Montreal who is, kind of in the same boat as you, is very critical of Israeli policies and is quick to, she doesn't shy away from calling out anti-Semitism when she sees it, but she is quick to say, okay, maybe you're going a little too far. In France, what they have, the loi Gayso, which is basically it's illegal to criticize Israel, right? And you can't deny the Holocaust.
Yeah, I can't believe it would be the first, but it's more of the latter, right? I don't know the law specifically, actually.
Yeah. I don't know all the details of it, but it's just like rough thumbnails, but they do have some stuff about criticizing Israel in there. And so, your perspective from that would be interesting because, like you said, I don't think you're the only one.
No, I'm not the only one. So I guess I can start with just a framework of imagining my life. I was born in 1982. I'm 36 now. To parents who are both liberal hippies, grew up in the 60s with long hair. If you look at the photo albums, I don't think that's unique at all. Also in the Jewish experience, to grandparents so the grandparents on both of my sides were born in America, but their parents weren't, which is also not unique, just given the timelines of these things. So, my family tree on both sides came from, I guess, what is now Ukraine, but at the time Russia, Eastern Europe, Russia kind of borderline stuff. And came earlier sort of than the 40s. They left Europe in the teens and the 20s, sort of seeing the writing on the wall. And entire swaths of my family tree disappeared in the Holocaust, the ones that didn't leave. Every American Jew has this story. And, my mom is into sort of tracing the lineage of these things and has just done a lot of work on finding the family tree. And it is obviously remarkable to do the math of just how many first cousins that I would have if it weren't for Germany in the 40s. But to frame that, and so I grew up in Allentown, which is just a suburb outside of Philadelphia, New York, and it's, if you've seen American Beauty, you're sort of picturing the right kind of life for me. Also not unique. And then let's talk about sort of like the political aspect of it. My parents, very liberal, always voted blue, and I was brought up with sort of a lot of that talk in the house in this very open liberal society, very accepting, listen to folk music in the cars and all that kind of stuff. And then it came to Israel. So I went to what's called Hebrew High. I don't know what the equivalent in other religions would be. It was like school after school for the Jewish kids, where you would go to the synagogue and like take some classes. And it wasn't like super religious in my version of it, but it was religious, and it was certainly community building and insular. I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays, and probably started that when I was in like second grade, and probably continued that all the way through my bar mitzvah. And so like this was the kind of environment I was in, where it's all super accepting, super liberal. It was always getting professed that the Jewish ethic was very open and tolerant and liberal, and there was all this sort of, lovey-dovey hippie stuff. And then it came to Israel, which was this thing that could not be criticized. And from my uninformed, very like angsty teenage mind, it seemed like total hypocrisy. Just seeing what I would see of, here's this country that we just blindly support because those are like our people, but they seem to be engaged in some pretty shitty behavior, but like you can't question that. And if you try, your wrist is slapped very, very quickly. And that, again, like as an angsty teenager, is like, it's like telling the kid you can't press the one button in the elevator, like that's the one you want to press the most. So of course, starting to poke it was what I wanted to do, but it just felt like hypocrisy. And then on a narrow sort of tract of that was, this gets very complicated, but the victimhood status and celebration of Jews and Judaism, in my experience again, sort of has become the story, the defining story. Both of my parents, I should also mention this, because this might also be unique in a post-Holocaust Jewish world. Both my parents are atheists, but very much identified as Jewish. And that even confuses some people, and I think it's too easy to dismiss that as just, well, Judaism is an ethnicity. I think it's much more complicated than that. I think, again, to tie that to the victimhood thing, if I had to put like the tenet and the story, again, in my experience of what it means to be Jewish, is almost as easy to summarize as, there's this joke that every holiday in Judaism is, well, they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. And it's like that's Passover, if you know the story of like the Egypt thing, like every story. And so the Holocaust, as not, of course, a mythical story, but an actual awful event in history where that sentence bore itself out, and unfortunately only a few of us survived, so let's eat, has risen to the top of the, pyramid of what it means to be Jewish. Again, in my experience, you can fold in all these other things, but that story about who we are as Jews and what that means is kind of the whole thing. So starting to question Israel, and again, we'll have to, I'm curious your questions, but connecting Israel, of course, to the Holocaust is just intimate. Like, it's hard to separate those two things. I think starting to question even Israel's behavior or policies, especially as a teenager, becomes a direct sort of criticism of, I don't think I'm Jewish, or like, I don't know what it means to be Jewish. If you're criticizing that, how can you sort of be one of us? Like, that's the thing that you can't sort of set aside, especially when there is no declaration of believing in God, or that, like there is, and of course in the more religious versions of it, but as probably most American Jews will tell you, like that's almost beside the point. What you actually think about the truth of these claims, that's totally beside the point. It's actually your devotion to protecting this lineage and this story and these cultural practices, because people have always been trying to kill it. Like, you have an obligation to keep lighting the Shabbat candles because everyone's always trying to snuff it out. So if you stop, you're almost a traitor to the cause. And this relates to some of like the criticism, if you see me sort of throw some jabs at Ben Shapiro for not attending an interfaith marriage. I think that's really the fairest version of what's happening in his head is this notion of breaking the chain. This is a thing that I always heard growing up about not breaking the chain. Anyway, I'll let you jump.
Okay,
into
no, I mean,
stuff.
no,
Yeah.
there was a lot there. Okay, when I was going to university, Montreal has a very large Jewish population. Majority of my friends were, I didn't have like majority friends, university friends that were WASP. My friends of growing up were like the WASP, like the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, right? But there's one girl who was a Moroccan Jew. Another girl was a convert, and there were some friends of mine who were from Eastern Europe, or there was a couple from Israel who were all Jewish, and they would talk about this, and that was one of the main things that was brought up, that Israel gives them an identity, and so by attacking Israel, you're attacking their identity more so than attacking their faith, because a lot of them were agnostic, atheistic. Right. I had my bar mitzvah. Some of them might go on, the high holy days, might go to the synagogue or something, or go to, temple.
My version of Judaism as well. Yeah, it's just the high holidays, occasional Shabbat. Yeah,
and whatever, but they were more than happy to eat a lobster salad or have a bacon sandwich, right? Like
yes.
But so for them, I get that, like the identity, and it's recently, like we were talking earlier, if you criticize Islam, you're criticizing the identity of that person. It's Islamophobia. And I can see the parallels in that. Some of the things I saw at university, and my friends laughed at it, because I remember one poster was from the Jewish Students Association. Something like 70% of the water in the Middle East is in enemy Arab hands. And like I said, my friends were, even the ones who were from Israel, were just like, the Arabs did not define that geography.
Right.
Go back and complain to the British or the French about that. And my whole take on the Israel thing was that, I obviously as a teenager, I didn't look into it much, and it was just go along with the flow to some extent. But the more I read into it and especially speaking to my brother-in-law, he did a PhD in Yiddish, which whatever, don't want to get into that. But part of it was studying World War II and how Yiddish expanded, and and we were talking about that, and he was saying, well, some of the lands were sold to the British by Arabs who made up fake deeds and sold their fellow Arabs out, right? And so I'm like, okay, if you have a problem with Israel, we can discuss your problems, but let's not go back to should it have been formed, should it not have been formed. It's there. We're living with it. Let's discuss it as it is. And let's not wrap it up in the identity of a people, even though, like I said, a lot of people do. And even a lot of non-Jews will consider attacking Israel as attacking all the Jews in the world.
Right. So, if I can sharpen though to fast forward to what I'm worried about today is actually maybe the best place to start that question is this term Zionism. And our mutual friend Yasmin Muhammad actually, we had a really great talk about this when we were together for something for the film actually, and it ended up her putting up a poll just asking people how do you define Zionism, and she gave a few options, and it was really informative because what I heard growing up and sort of what was in my head growing up about what Zionism was an overtly religious claim. It was, if I had to define it, again, this is what I was getting in Pennsylvania in the 80s and 90s. It's surely shifted, but what I was getting was very much an overt claim that Zionism is not just support of Israel or some claim that Israel has a right to exist, but that land in particular was promised by God to us, the chosen people, and that's why it should exist. And this is sort of the fulfillment of the covenant of God. It's a rainbow after Noah's Ark. All that stuff was folded in to Zionism. I think the word has shifted, so we can set that aside. And now there's a party in Israel called the Religious Zionist Party. So that qualifier of religious in front of the word Zionist maybe is necessary. But let's talk about them then. The religious Zionists, because there are religious Zionists, and we need to talk about them, should be roundly criticized the same way as any other religious maniac in the world. They're doing actual harm. They have crazy ideas in their head. And they're nut jobs, right? We should criticize them just as fervently as we criticize Islamists who think the Quran is, the literal word of God and want to impose this upon society, and that's why they make their daughter do whatever. Like, the analogy is, there's nothing breaks in that analogy. So those people, I fear. So to bring it to the cartoon, and we could talk specifically about the cartoon at some point, but criticizing the U.S.'s relationship with Israel, and not just Israel generally, but the U.S.'s relationship with Israel, specifically their far-right religious nutjobs, is what seems to be impossible to criticize now. How would you do it in a cartoon? My challenge was, you saw this on Twitter, of like, if you think this is not a taboo, it's almost like the Muhammad challenge now. Draw it for me. What does it look like? And if you're going through Google trying to find the one that, like, oh, I think this is the one, but you're a little afraid that someone might call you an anti-Semite for putting it out, that proves the point that we've now reached a blasphemy taboo, because that tract of the religious Jews, which we all know Netanyahu uses like pawns. I mean, and we'll talk about the Palestinians as well. I'm sure all get used as pawns. Those religious Jews, whether Netanyahu thinks they're useful idiots or not, are the ones who are sort of the thumb in the eye in the West Bank. We know that to be true. They have a level of control over the politics in Israel that we know, thus over the politics of America that we know, and our relationship to Israel. Criticizing the U.S.'s relationship to Israel generally is probably safe to do. Some people shared cartoons that they thought escaped the trope that I was specifically looking for, and they probably did. You could probably do a cartoon that criticizes the U.S.'s relationship to Israel, but maybe not. Even that's getting tricky. But can you do one specifically about those religious nutjobs in Israel who, through Netanyahu and through the far-right government of Israel, have a level of control and coerciveness over U.S.'s politics, whether they're doing it on, whether we're doing it willingly, because immediately you start to hear the quote-unquote anti-Semitic tropes of the mind control stuff and the Jews really pulling the strings, how do you criticize that without setting off those alarm bells? And if it's impossible, well, then we've reached a blasphemy taboo. And then we could talk about, as some people may suggest, maybe that taboo actually should be there and it has some expiration date just because the Holocaust is still so recent. And if that's the case, just let me know when we can do it, because if it's not now, I don't know. But there's real cost to not being able to criticize that. And I'm a huge fan of political cartooning, a huge fan of the artwork of it and the necessity of it. I remember doing a school report when I was young about Thomas Nast, who's a famous American political cartoonist. If I'm getting this right, I think he invented Uncle Sam. He was the one who famously drew that. I think political cartooning is incredibly effective. To pitch another documentary that I didn't make, there's one called The Cartoonists, The Vanguards of Democracy. It's really good. It was at Cannes a few years ago. If you can find it, find it. It's like profiles of political cartoonists working all over the world in some pretty extreme circumstances. I think they do incredibly important work. I'm pretty horrified looking at some of the cases of the people who've been fired for this particular kind of criticism that I'm pointing to. So, I can sort of leave that there, but I can bring it back to my childhood, remembering hearing the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, cry foul all the time. And the hard part is there's a lot of fouls against Jews, so this is very tricky work. And it's hard to draw the line and calling it out of I don't think that's a foul. I think you're actually just making it impossible. And when the victimhood narrative becomes the central tenet of the religion, then you have a real problem. Because this is not unique to Judaism, although I think it's pretty fervent, and maybe for good reason in a post-Holocaust world. Then the ADL claiming foul, even if it's not, is actually part of the narrative of what it means to be Jewish. Of look, we're under attack, we're always under constant attack, and we somehow survive. So, I mean, that's a lot to throw on the table. But again, even on your podcast here, I'll put out the challenge. If you think this is okay to do, criticize exactly what I'm talking about. Which you're going to have to talk about symbols of Judaism. There, if you're going to have in a cartoon, I don't know how to do it. Maybe I'm not that creative. If you're going to criticize people who have the belief in their mind that this land in particular this land, belongs to us because God promised it to us, and you are on our land, and God didn't choose you, he chose me, you're going to have to represent them somehow in the symbol. I don't know how you do that without getting called an anti-Semite these days, but try it. And then you're going to have to do this thing of, like, again, that it has influence over American politics. So you're going to be dancing around the trope of sort of the Rothschilds and the mind control in the shadows. If you can do it, do it. If you can't do it, we have a problem. That's where I'm at.
Okay, no, that's all fair. And I no, but I understand some of that. And I understand, like, okay, there's religious right everywhere, and let's just call them that for sake of, lack of better terms. Yeah, so, and I do this. I've never done this, like, with the Israeli thing. I have criticized policies, but I haven't gone into that. But, I equate not criticizing, if you're allowed to criticize the Westboro Baptist Church, or you're allowed to criticize, the religious right in the States, you're allowed to criticize the what else is in the States, like the Dominion Christians and all that. You should be allowed to criticize Islam. Like, Islam should be called. There are far right policies in Islam. Like, there are, killing of homosexuals, blasphemy laws, killing of apostates. Those are far right things, if you want to use the term far right, and that's religious right. And so, yeah, I get where you're coming from, because I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. To criticize the religious right in Israel, especially the politics, because it is so entrenched in the politics, it is like you're criticizing Jews, and technically you are, but you're not. You're not criticizing them for the fact that they are Jews.
No.
You're not even criticizing for the fact that they're religious. You're criticizing them for the fact that they're using extremes of their religion or their faith to implement policy, right? That is what I think. That's the criticism you want people to be able to have.
I think everything should be up for.
Oh yeah, I know.
It's like I put this out too because it gets so the line is so tricky where when you do the thought experiment of, like, if I'm right and there's a taboo, I certainly think I am, and there's a blasphemy situation that we have on our hands, who benefits from that blasphemy? And it's clear who benefits from that blasphemy at the moment, which is Netanyahu. Netanyahu is thrilled that New York Times cartoonist got fired. Thrilled. Now, you could take one step further of, like, figuring out who benefits from it and then assuming they were the ones who engineered it in the first place. That's where the anti-Semitism and those conspiracy theories about Jews running the world and manipulating all this go off the rails. But you don't have to make that move. You can say who benefits from it and then stop there, because who benefits from it is clear in this case. If I'm right, I mean, they're thrilled. They're absolutely thrilled that cartoonist got fired, and he's not the only one. That a lot of cartoonists are getting fired for this kind of blasphemy. It's like, oh, I get to use these people, and they can do whatever they want, have their crazy ideas, and then if anybody tries to criticize it, they immediately get called a bigot and lose their job. This is gravy. But if I'm wrong, again, just show me. I'm tired of people telling me, you can criticize Israel without being an anti-Semite. Show me. And don't just criticize Israel. Criticize Israel's far-right religious group and its influence, again, whether willingly or not, on American politics and American discourse. Show me you could do it without being an anti-Semite. I dare people to do it. We're at that point now. Just do it. Just show me. And if you can't show me, I'm calling bullshit on these people. There's a lot of people making this noise. Barry Weiss, I think, is writing a book about this. I'm really curious how far down the line she goes, because none of this should say that anti-Semitism is not real or on the rise. We know it is. We absolutely know it is. The same way post 9/11, anti-Muslim bigotry was on the rise. That's why it made it even more urgent to be sharp and accurate about our criticism. So we know this is out there. The stakes are rising. And so just show me. Someone call bullshit on me. Go ahead and show me. Publish it in the New York Times. I dare you.
Okay, first of all, I agree. Firing people for drawing cartoons is ridiculous. It gives legitimacy to nut jobs who want to do worse than fire them. You should be allowed to draw anything. And you're right. Like, okay, I don't know the specifics of, was that cartoonist an anti-Semite? I don't think he was. I don't know anything about that cartoonist. I don't even know who drew that cartoon. Yeah. And if I can find a picture, I'll post it in a link. But it was basically it was a dachshund that looked like Netanyahu wearing a Star of David.
Star of David on a leash, being led, and Donald Trump was the guy holding the dog.
With a yarmulke.
He was blind and wearing a yarmulke. Yeah, the yarmulke, I think, on the head was where it pissed people off, I think. But there's a few other things. I don't know.
Okay, I mean, the yarmulke thing, again, does that... You don't know the cartoonists, and they are political cartoons. You get something out of it, but you're not going to get a whole explanation. It's not an opinion piece. It's not an expose or anything like that. So was he saying that, Trump is a hidden Jew or something ridiculous like that? Or he's under their influence? Now, people do it all the time, pointing out, this senator or this congressman is bought out by Big Pharma or the NRA or whatever, and they can show links. Now, if you can actually show links to, and I think what's her name, Ilhan Omar did it with the APIC, right? Oh, they're giving money to these people, and APIC is so. And I'm not even sure if I'm getting the acronym right, but yeah. So there, I think maybe one of the issues is that from the creation of Israel onwards, not that there wasn't anti-Semitism or talk of it before, but I think from that point, because we didn't have social media, and there's only 3 networks in the U.S. It was there wasn't a lot of information available, that you weren't able to have really nuanced talks about this because you were only getting a very, very limited view.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, okay, that was your perspective in Allentown or whatever. But like you said, after 9/11, social media was starting to come out. The internet was more ubiquitous. You could get people's views instantaneously from across the world. So I think at that point, people made a conscious effort, whereas before it didn't. And so now I think you're trying to go back and fight against history as well as saying, okay, let's fight against these blasphemy laws, which I'm all for it. I don't want people fired. People have the right to say, I think that's anti-Semitic. I'm going to cancel my subscription to the New York Times. And, at that point, do they make a business decision or not? And, you can get into the whole, it's a private organization. They can do whatever they want. I just think it's wrong to fire people because, they did something that a bunch of people didn't like. I mean, and when I say they did something, they drew a cartoon. Like, you didn't go out and...
Cartoons are supposed to be provocative, honestly.
But that's just it. And it keeps coming back to me, the thing that Douglas Murray had said once talking about the Danish cartoons. He's like, can you, or the Charlie Hebdo, can you think of something that's smaller than a cartoon to start this conversation?
Right.
And honestly, but so yeah, I mean, I looked when you asked about that. I said, okay, I'll look. I saw some that were criticizing the religious in Israel, but not necessarily the religious, how they affect U.S. policy or how they affect their policy there, and then the U.S. will side along, agree with what they're doing. And I couldn't find exactly quite what you're looking for, but. I don't know. I just think it's the sensitivity thing. I think we're so heightened up now. We're so ratcheted up about everything that, and it's easy to, it doesn't take much to fan the flames of a mob these days. You can go, just completely off topic. I commented on a post that another mutual friend of ours, Ollie Rizvi, had made. And it was about the idiots throwing the milkshakes at Tommy Robinson and all that, right? And Nigel Farage. And Ollie made a joke about it. And I don't, and I didn't even comment on the joke. I commented on his comment. He made a post relating to that joke. And, fine. Someone got hit with a milkshake. It's funny. It's like a guy getting hit with a pie in the face.
Yeah.
But, Ollie's like, well, it's not violence because it's just a milkshake. I'm like, no, it's probably the lowest form of violence. It's still technically an assault. You're throwing something at someone with the intent of causing some harm. I don't care about his joke. I mean, like I said, I found his joke mildly funny, but I think he could have done a lot better. But but I mean, whatever. I'm not here to critique. I'm not here to critique the joke. I was critiquing his take on it's not violence and it won't lead to escalation.
Did he say that? I mean, I was actually the escalation thing. I was actually talking to him about it this morning, actually privately. The same thing. I don't know about the violence. Like, he didn't condone it.
He didn't condone it, but he said it's not violence. I mean, I can find his exact quote that he put up.
I mean, he and I both agreed that people just need to lighten the fuck up a little bit. But everyone's so heightened, as you said, and I mean that goes to to bring it back to sort of the serious note in a way because I opened up the door in this initial sort of like foray into the cartoon. It's possible that again the Holocaust was just too damn awful, which of course it was. I mean, believe me, it gets drilled into you as growing up the way I did, that we just should be like ridiculously oversensitive about this topic, and that a blasphemy taboo about criticizing religious Jews should be in place for, let's say, 200 years or something, just because, like you said, it's like, don't take any risks. Because we have to admit that there are risks in free speech. There's risks in criticism, like there always is. So I made a movie. I've made this point before, but I made a movie, as you know, you saw, that goes into the nuance of criticisms of Islam and tried to be as careful as possible. But I acknowledge that there's a risk, hopefully a really, really small one, but a risk that somebody will see it and interpret it very selectively and decide that it says something that's like maybe like reading really unfairly between the lines and decides to go out and do something awful because of the film I made. Does that mean I shouldn't have made the film? Well, no. Like we always have to live in a world where we do the consequences of the negative universe experiment, where in a world where obviously I'm convinced that I live in a universe where making that film does more good than a universe where I don't make the film because of that risk. But I have to acknowledge that there's at least a tiny risk there. So yeah, putting out a cartoon that criticizes Jews, is there a risk that that cartoon incites a mob? Of course. And is that just actually too real? Because we see mobs against Jews and have seen them in history all far too often with awful, awful consequences. My own family tree, like I'm saying, is that enough to just say, yeah, this is a taboo and a blasphemy that actually like we should uphold? If that's the case, we're going to make the case. But there are that is not a costless. Ask the Palestinians in the West Bank about that. If there's no cost to just the calculus that I just said, and they obviously will have some strong disagreements. Ask the Jews in Israel who aren't fans of this influence that the religious right has over them. They don't have to go in the military and stuff. This comes up all the time in Israel. There's real cost to this taboo. But if we do the calculus that we're going to accept those costs, I mean, not even costs, it's actual harm that we can see and measure, but we accept that harm because the potential harm of inciting another Holocaust is just too salient to us right now. That's clearly what's happening psychologically. Is it true politically? Maybe. Those are hard tea leaves to parse. I don't know, but I'm just I'm pointing out that that's what the taboo is. I mean, as sort of another anecdote of just how like deep the Holocaust and the victimhood narrative and Israel tied to that all is for an American Jew like myself growing up in the 80s and 90s in a suburb in Pennsylvania, is, I don't even know how old I was, but when the Holocaust Museum opened in D.C., this was like a trip that sort of the entire community, it was called Temple Bethel, it's still there in Allentown, like our entire class basically went to see it, and it's an incredible museum. I think they did an incredible job. Birthright always being talked about. No one talks about who funds Birthright, but Sheldon Alderson, far right, a billionaire. I didn't go on Birthright, but a lot of my friends did. The connection between that mantra of like people have always been trying to kill you and people like you, and now we have a safe place to call home, and we're going to defend that. That is the religion now. You don't hear about God, or like you say the prayers, they're in Hebrew, you don't even know what it means. Like, as another just anecdote, my mom became an atheist, she said, when reading about the Holocaust. I think she was a teenager. When reading about the Holocaust and reading just an absolutely awful, gut-wrenching story of like a Nazi taking a Jewish baby and just like swinging it around and like smashing it into a tree and killing it, or just for like fun or something, or almost torture, like this awful story. And she read it and she decided right then and there, no God would allow this to happen, and she became an atheist because of the horror of the Holocaust. The Holocaust probably made a lot of atheist Jews, honestly, but a different narrative of what it means to be Jewish really interwound itself around that event for obvious reasons. I'm not even criticizing it, I'm just doing analysis of it, and tied through the historical stories as well. Passover probably became a little more important. The story of Passover, which probably is historically totally inaccurate. There's no evidence that Jews were ever slaves in Egypt, but someone will probably disagree with me on that. But the story is about, God helping us escape this evil tyrant Pharaoh. And like every story, the Hanukkah has the same kind of thing. I don't think it's a surprise in the post-Holocaust world.
One thing on the Passover. I mean, it's just little technicality. And it's, God actually had to have doors marked so he knew who to pass over. Like, so he's
mysterious way.
and secondly,
He killed all the firstborn of the Egyptians. It's like a genocidal
exactly. That's what I was getting at.
I hate that story beginning to end. I'll tell you, actually, there's a story in there probably lesser known to non-Jews. If you've ever attended a Seder, I don't know if you have, you should go to one. Next year you could come to my mom's. It's great. If she's watching, she does a really good job. But she always skips this one part because I've always been bitching about it. There's one part, it's not like in the Torah or even, I don't know where it came from. It's called the four children. Jews will know what I'm talking about here. The four children, and they all ask questions. I should look it up. Maybe you could look it up too. But there's the wise child, the wicked child, the simple child, and there's one more child. There's four children, and they all ask questions. But the wicked child in the story asks the question, you tell me why you think this is wicked. The question is, what does this mean to you? That question is apparently wicked at the table. And the interpretation of it is by using the word you, it's like separating the child from kind of the tribe, saying like, this is your thing, and I'm not a part of it. So what does this mean to you is a wicked question for some reason or whatever. But it's almost like they're writing in sort of the blasphemy taboo into the story of Passover. But anyway, I was always the wicked child, I guess, at the table, because I was always being like, what the fuck is all this about? But anyway, the food is fine. But maybe it's a little off point, but it just has become the narrative again in a post-Holocaust world, even more so. It probably was there before, but ramped up more in just that one line. So to bring it back to, again, maybe some more salient and some people like Ben Shapiro, when he won't attend the wedding of an interfaith marriage or whatever, and my first initial sort of jab at it was a little snarky, and I tried to clean it up. So I apologize for the initial snark. But to clean it up, to be fair, it was that. It would be this like, Ben he would probably never put it directly this way, or maybe he would. Ben has decided that interfaith marriage is the biggest threat to the future of Judaism surviving in the world. And because Jews are always under threat to be eliminated historically, by his cousin marrying a non-Jew, he's participating in this almost traitorous act, and so he's not going to be at the wedding because he doesn't support that. That's probably truer to what's happening in Ben's mind. I grew up with that assumption as well. I even put this in my thread that it was sort of assumed that me and my brother would end up being with Jews and marrying Jews. We always knew which other couples that we were friends with or my parents knew were interfaith marriages. It was always mentioned. It was always sort of this like low level, we just heard it in this sort of like scoffing criticism way. Whenever I had a new girlfriend and I called my mom, the first question is, what is her last name? It was like, you knew what she was asking. She was a little more intimate than my dad, but they both outgrew this very quickly when my college girlfriend, her name was Kat Wilson, not a Jew, is like the loveliest girl in the world. But my mom was a little cold to her for like, a month until she broke her down because she was so lovely, and then whatever. She outgrew this thing, but I think a lot of Jews never do, and a lot of Jews, I don't know, in your listener group probably still feel that, or if they have kids, they're kind of hoping they end up with a Jew. But I think it's all wrapped up in that narrative of this, like, you can't break the chain. If you're the one who breaks the chain, you like really, spat on your ancestors' graves who went through the Holocaust to get to you. So like, how dare you? It's wrapped up in that kind of, and then Israel becomes a big link in that chain. So
like I said, I get that, and I get the identity thing, and I get the fear of, well, if you let this one, quote unquote anti-Semitic cartoon go, you're opening the floodgates to all kinds of hatred towards Jews. I mean, after the Christchurch thing, the amount of vitriol that was thrown, not so much at me, I'm not important enough, I guess, and thankfully so. But like Ali and Yasmin and Majid and Sam, you're responsible for what happened in Christchurch because you speak out against Islam. and I can see those parallels. I can see,
Right.
oh, you cannot criticize Israel because then you're responsible for the Holocaust, or you're responsible for the next Holocaust. And again, it gets down to the sensitivity, but I think part of some of the struggle, okay, that someone like a Barry Weiss, who I disagree with her. I think some of the things she does are brilliant. I think some of the other things, it's like with everyone else. But I think part of the struggle here is, and I don't know enough about Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. I have my suspicions, and I'll leave it at that. But they are, I think she's freaking out because there is an Islamic anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's there, and it's the videos coming out of mosques and stuff. Where they say a prayer and everyone's just saying Amin because it's the same thing. The prayers in Arabic, and these people are probably, majority of Muslims don't speak Arabic. They don't understand what the prayer is. But when you look at the translation, it's like, kill all the Jews. Until all the Jews are killed, we won't have Judgment Day. And then the rocks will tell you, the rocks will tell you there's a Jew hiding behind them, and there's only going to be one tree that won't give you that information. The Jews will start planting that everywhere. Okay, it's there. So maybe they're cognizant of that, and that's fueling some of their reaction now, because they are seeing a new form of it that's not really being addressed.
Yeah.
And then there was also, like, right after the Temple of Life.
Barry was a congregate member. Yeah.
Okay. So right after that had happened, I think it was like a day or two, the New York Times published this story about how, the rise of left-wing anti-Semitism, and how in New York State, in the past 22 months, every act that the police had investigated was done by people you would describe as left-wing. And how the New York Times, the opinion piece where they're talking about how it's not being reported on because it's not the right type of anti-Semitism. So I'm wondering if some of those fears are exacerbating the problem. Like they're afraid of this new form, which unfortunately, and I'm going to get called an Islamophobe for this. That there is an Islamic anti-Semitism, and I have one of my friends who's critical of Israel. She goes to these interfaith things, and she's like, "Oh, my friends from this mosque, they did this, and they had a Passover dinner, and they're going to come to our they had a Passover dinner at the mosque, and then during Ramadan, they were invited to a seder to break the fast with the seder instead of just a fast breaking a fast at the mosque." So these things are all great, but it's she's couching her understanding of Islam from that, and not listening to other people who say it's in the book and they do it. And maybe in the same sense, people like, and I don't want to single out Barry Weiss, but
she's writing a book. I'm sure it's going to be really good.
But she's coming from this other end where she's seeing a new rise of it, a new form of it, and she's also, you do have certain things coming up, especially again, I hate the terms left and right, but on the left, you have coming up with the whole BDS movement, and there is Jews aren't a protected class because they're white now, apparently. You have that kind of idiocy. So I can see the concerns, but I think the concerns are being blown way out of proportion in some ways. Not the Islamic thing, but like that cartoon is anti-Semitic, or I don't like Israel's policy on the right of return. Right? All of a sudden, you're an anti-Semite because you're questioning that. It's like, okay, well, maybe it's also a geographical issue. There's only so much space in Israel, right? There's not, so you have to, and it comes down, and it's like I said, like the ratcheting up of just about anything else. Like, you're pro-life. Do you want to kill a mother? You're anti-immigration. You're a racist. This country was built on immigration, like both Canada and the United States. And it's, the thing that gets me worried the most, okay, yes, people losing their jobs, a new blasphemy law coming in, which can then be exploited by others. But it's just this, everyone wants to go to the extreme. No one wants to sit there and, have a talk. Like, even when I replied to you on Twitter, I really don't like doing that. Even like I said, when I mentioned this, like, I commented on a post that Ali had made. Like, if there are people that are friends of mine and I can reach out to privately, I prefer to do it that way, just because I don't, especially Twitter, like 280 characters. I can't sit there and write long threads. I don't know how people do it. I can get to about 4 and then I just lose interest. But I can sit there and I can type out 5,000 words, no problem. But like I said, it's just the Twitter thing. Like, I think, it's just we're getting too frustrated about everything, and I'm getting so frustrated I can't even talk about it. It's just, I'm getting frustrated at the frustration that people are having and the inability to just make a post. Like I could have put out that cartoon and said, I find this cartoon distasteful, and just left it at that.
Well, let me try to then, because we're all frustrated, so that's fine that you're going in circles on that one. But my pushback I'll go back to my teenage angst again, was hearing the message of the biggest threat to the survival of Judaism in the future is interfaith marriage. You would hear this from, it's called the Bima, but from the pulpit, really, where the rabbi, you would hear it in the sermons about this danger. People were doing the math of Jews are going to disappear because we're all, all of the boys and girls are marrying Goyim. It's you would hear this. And getting that and hearing that sort of as the ethos in my family and in my family dinner table and all that. And my pushback was that's bullshit. That's bullshit. The biggest threat to Judaism that I'm seeing it now is the hypocrisy of values. No group can really hinge together if it's as hypocritical in its values and its principles as I'm seeing here, which is be liberal, be open, all the loving stuff that they want to preach, but not this thing. These guys get to do whatever they want because they're wearing the right colors and they've got the right twirly things in their hair and they follow the same book as us and we share some ancestors. So not them. That hypocrisy of principle and value I was that's going to kill Judaism. My biggest fear, it's I feel I go crazy with these things. My biggest fear was most Jews, I don't have the recent polling data, but most Jews vote Democrat, vote liberal. It's still probably the same. The hardcore ones are one issue, and they just vote based on Israel. And growing up, it was always my fear, again, was noticing this trend that if Israel and Judaism aligns itself with America's far right and vice versa, if that's the unholy alliance that's coming here, that's what's going to kill Judaism. And then seeing, fast forward, 20 years in my life, seeing Netanyahu literally with a selfie video in the Golan Heights saying that he's going to name a city there after Donald Trump is it's hard to not walk down the street being I fucking told you so. If this is the state of Judaism, that we can't even criticize that in a cartoon in the New York Times without eating ourselves in the ADL, Judaism's done. Forget it. Judaism's done. And so I had problems using the term Judaism and the identifier as Judaism. I really still don't like doing it. I don't call myself a Jew, because it has become, and it was clear to me as a child that it was becoming not an ideology, not really a religion, but a political statement and a political position that was getting too intimately tied to positions that I didn't hold and ought not to hold. And that, the danger of and you know this from Islam, I'm sure, the danger of a religion becoming a political movement, that's when it's done. That's when you hope it starts to crumble. And Judaism is in danger in a post-Holocaust world of becoming a political ideology and a political movement. I'm sure people would disagree with me. But if you can't, listen, we can talk about the cartoon again, because I've asked people what specifically is anti-Semitic about that cartoon. And they'll be well, I don't know, you could always find, the Nazis had, a cartoon of Jews as a dog somewhere and be well, then they should have been a dog. I'm fine, change it to what do you want to change it to then? Change the dog. If that's what you think is anti-Semitic, change the dog. What do you want to do, a chicken or a seeing eye cat? Does that make it better? Netanyahu was a cat wearing the Star of David with Trump, and then it's no, it was the Trump yarmulke. Maybe that was it then. It's okay, so what's wrong with the Trump yarmulke? Because to me, I read that symbol as of course Trump doesn't give a shit about the Jews. We all know that, and he's just going to do what's he's a dumb, blind idiot in that cartoon who has no idea which way he's going, and Netanyahu is probably a lot more politically savvy and a smarter guy than Trump is leading him, And, so this is like a fake Judaism that Trump is wearing. I think that's what it was doing to me. But if you think that symbol's holy, it's like, so again, I'm like, just tell me how to do it. Just tell me how to do it. If not, like, we're in real dire straits. The Jewish people, it's going to need to reinvent itself around some of this somewhere. And if it doesn't have the courage to sever itself from its own religious maniacs, then forget it. Like, then this is what you're talking about in Islam. I mean, like, the fear that probably you had too in a post 9/11 world, which again, like, I'm pointing to the Holocaust a lot, and then the post 9/11 world, was that the less nuanced critics of Islam would come after someone who looks like you, because they think you're a brown man and you're the bad guy. And the whole idea, Majid's whole work, the film that I made, all of the work that you and I do a lot on that particular topic, is to try to draw these lines of, like, no, the hashtag not all Muslims, right? It's like, it's a complicated thing. So if I get attacked when the backlash of Jews happens, which probably will happen again, like, what the fuck? Not me.
I get it, and I've said the same thing. Like, a person who's truly bigoted and truly racist is not going to sit there and wait for me to say I'm an ex-Muslim. They don't care. I'm brown. You've got the last name Shapiro. Okay, yeah. You're Jewish. Like, okay, but getting to the like, just touching on the marriage thing there. I mean, like, I've heard it, and I've never. Again, like I said, I've got friends and stuff, but these kind of things never really came up. Like, I had one friend who in Vancouver, and he married a Gentile, like a non-Jewish woman, and he brought it up because Judaism is maternally passed down, so my kids technically won't be Jews. And but he's not lamenting the fact that Jews are going to die out, right? But this idea that Jews are going to die out because of interfaith marriage, it's like, okay, well, there is a solution. You can get rid of that matrilineal link, and if the children are raised in that tradition and they've had the bris and they've had all that, why are they not Jewish? Okay, there is that one thing, right? If it is an ideology and whatever, and it's the same thing of the white genocide. We're going to be bred out of existence by the immigrants, right? And
not to interrupt, but I have a question for you, because we're getting to something where I looked up years ago. Pew Research did a really interesting poll with, I think it was just specifically American Jews, but asking, they had a list and a sort of a long multiple choice, but what does it mean to be Jewish? And there was a list of things like keeping kosher, believing in God, supporting the state of Israel. There was like this long list, and the results were quite fascinating. What would be, and it's very much not believing in God as like a highest thing. You can imagine. I think kosher was actually sort of high, but supporting the state of Israel was very, very high, like 50% or something or higher polled. That's like a necessary ingredient to call yourself a Jew and Jewish. Which, by the way, I should also mention, like, I'm critical of Israel. I think Israel has every right to exist. Israel, like, all the things that you want me to say about Israel, I will say. The only state of the Middle East where, like, gay marriage is allowed. Israel's great. I've been there several times, and also I've been to the West Bank. Israel's great.
That's where raves started. That's where you got ecstasy from.
Yeah, Israel's got a lot of great. It's a beautiful, beautiful. The other thing, as a side note, is like there's probably a lot of post hoc rationalization of God, because I always say it's a beautiful place. It's like, it's no surprise that every religion in the world was like, hey, that really lovely piece of real estate that's on like the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea where everything is beautiful and everything grows. I think God promised that to me. Like no one's making the case that like the Upper Peninsula of Minnesota was promised to me. Very few people. So like there's probably just a lot of just general biology that points us that direction. But Israel's great. I should put that on the table. But where do you, if I asked you about Islam, like what does it mean to be a Muslim, and maybe in a modern world? I mean, this is obviously the struggle of the time, but if we pulled the world of, let's just actually say, because that one was, well, let's say the whole world. If we pulled, what does it mean to be a Muslim? I imagine the poll results, if you put like accepting Muhammad as the prophet and Allah's God, would get like 98% or something.
Okay,
like
the most basic form of it is, yes, there is no God but Allah. Muhammad is his last prophet, and the Quran is the revealed word of Allah. If you believe those three things, I mean, that's the profession of faith, right? The Shahada.
Right.
So if you say that in front of three male witnesses, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, yeah, you're a Muslim now.
Yeah.
So that's
Is there any like political? Would it be like it's hard to draw an analogy here of with what has happened to Judaism in a post-Holocaust world?
See, I mean, okay, Islam. Any government that follows Sharia, their laws are based on interpretations of the Quran. So you can go to like extreme ones like Saudi Arabia, some that have some form of Sharia, like Tunisia has a certain form of Sharia, and they're getting a little bit more secular. But at the core of it, they all believe that there is no God but Allah. Muhammad is his prophet, and the Quran is the revealed word of God. Right? So you believe that, you're a Muslim. Now, at that point, people say, "Oh, Majid's not a Muslim because he goes to strip clubs." Yeah, the 9/11 attackers went to strip clubs because they knew they were going to get absolved of all their sins. But you can say Majid's not practicing or very secular, or your typical Christian or Jew. It's the cafeteria style. I'm going to pick this, but I'm not going to pick that. I'll pick in Islam they have the zakat, which is that's the taxes you would actually pay in Muslim countries, but it's like a tithe.
What about yourself? Like, let alone Majid. I'll just like ask about you. You don't call yourself a Muslim, and the reason is very much because
I stopped calling myself anything to do with Muslim until recently, and even that I just kind of took on. But like when I stopped believing when I was 16.
Yeah, and at that moment, because I'm saying, like, why don't you call yourself a Muslim? Because if you did, it would demand.
No, I started calling myself cultural Muslim, which I think is wrong because there is no real Muslim culture, or a non-practicing Muslim, right? Like that's what I would refer to myself. Okay. But I changed that.
That like points to if you were meeting someone new for the first time, that would let them know a little. They could picture your upbringing, kind of.
That's it. Like I said, for me, what changed? Like for you, what changed was something different. But for me, it was my dad's funeral. The imam at my dad's funeral used the funeral as an opportunity to proselytize to the people who showed up to the funeral. And that disgusted me so much. Like I was in Bosnia when my dad died, and I flew out to Montreal. And same thing in Islam, the funeral should be held within the first 3 days, as it is in Judaism, right? So it was the day after I got there was the second day, and then we had the funeral. But like the imam said that, and my whole thinking was that Islam, okay, any religion, the purpose of a religion is not so much life, it's the rules for life so you get a better afterlife, right? And so the funeral should be one of the most important ceremonies that is held by the religion, and to treat it with that much disrespect, to actually try to convert people who've come here to show mourning, and there was no words of solace or anything given to the family, no comfort, no nothing, just how great Islam is and you should all join it. And at that moment I just said, you know what, I'm an atheist. I don't even want to say I'm a cultural Muslim or a non-practicing Muslim. I did not want to associate myself with that because I found the way that this representative of the religion treated something so important so disrespectfully. And then lately I've used the term ex-Muslim, just more so, not so much because I want to be associated with it or anything like that. It's just the fact that you can get killed for saying you no longer believe, or that you can get killed for even questioning. That to me, I think, okay, you know what? Let's bring this out to the forefront, and that's why I'm kind of using that term. But it's like I said, for me the Islam thing was, it was never wrapped up in our like my parents never wrapped it up as an identity. It was never, if you don't believe in the existence of Saudi Arabia, then you're not a Muslim. Like there is nothing like that really. Right. Islam's always had countries behind it. It's always had a state behind it. It in itself, as it started out, was a political movement as well as a religious movement, right? It was conquest. So, there is none of that. Okay, we had to give Israel back to the Jews, and so that'll be wrapped up in their identity. There was none of that with Islam.
So this notion of is it even possible to be an ex-Jew is really like what is interesting and puts pressure on this, because I've had plenty of people tell me like that's impossible, or if I say like I'm not Jewish, they really want to fight with me, my family members sort of included, because they insist on it being this thing that is just like you're born with and you can't not be, as almost like a race, like an ethnicity and a lineage that just makes you Jewish. And like okay, it sucks for me, honestly. Like it's a shitty thing to just be like cast as something that you cannot escape, especially when you have fears of that thing preceding you in certain conversations in a way that you just wish you could shed. Um, so, but I guess it's an open question of like, is it? Again, I think it's far too simple to be like, well, Judaism's an ethnicity. It's like, what the fuck do you mean by that? And let's talk about it. Do you mean literally just because my great grandfather had a long beard and wore a yarmulke, which he did? I can send you a picture. You should put it on as like the cover for this one.
Oh, send it. I'll use it.
Does that make me Jewish? Well, and like again, like almost like you. It's a use when meeting identifiers are so complicated, and with identity politics, things have gotten just so off the rails in conversations about identity. Because I think Sarah Hayter's made this point fairly well, actually, that when we talk about identity politics, when correctly defined, we should, of course, denigrate it and call it this huge error and a big mistake and leads to these horrible things, and so throw it away. Great, I'm on board. But identity, generally, it's just a very like different question. So like when I meet someone for the first time and I get these choices to sort of like, we have to use language to kind of broadcast a bit about ourselves, which really is using language to kind of, as we were doing with each other, like paint a picture of who you are to the other person in some way. So yeah, you could see me, of course, so you could already start doing a bunch of profiling really about what my life is like and who I might be based on my hair or the way I shave my beard or whatever it is. But then I could start offering you more information, and that's up to me to decide. So I could tell you I'm an Eagles fan. Does that mean anything to you? I'm a Phillies fan. You and I could start battling about sports, just like generally about. But me saying that to you, but if I was Canadian and I said like I'm a huge, Calgary Flames fan, that would mean something different to you. Yeah. And if I said I'm a huge Calgary Flames fan, but I'm from Toronto, that means something really different to you. Like it starts to, you could choose what you want, and then when you get to this inevitable like, okay, should I say what does it mean if I tell this person across from me I'm Jewish? And for you, like, what does it mean when I say I'm Muslim? And I find this all the time with people who pick and choose which identifiers they're going to use based on sort of who they're talking to. I think that sort of makes sense in a lot of ways. It's just sort of a utility practice. If I decide, actually, like if you meet someone, especially who's maybe even you're thinking might be has a similar experience to you on Earth, you might be more willing to use the identifier because they know what it means and all the caveats that come with it. Like if I meet someone and say I decide to say like I'm Jewish or I was raised Jewish in Allentown in a suburb, like there's certain people that I could use that to, and it paints a picture to them that starts to get closer to reality of my life of like, oh, okay, like probably had a bar mitzvah and like pressure to go to Israel as a teenager and know what a Seder is, and at home have a little yarmulke with my name in it and the date of my bar mitzvah. I do. I think they were silver. My brothers were yellow. Maybe I'm reversing that already. But just like generally that stuff. And then you can make like jokes about that. Like then there's a familiarity where you can start making jokes about what it was like eating your grandmother's kugel and stuff like that are like weird insider jokes that can be kind of fun. But in certain circles and in certain situations, I don't want to use the identifier Jewish because it's like, again, like precedes a whole conversation that you might not want to have, in particular with Judaism about Israel. But rarely, and this is why maybe it's complicated about Jews and Muslims, and why there seems to be, we'll get to this too, maybe an overcorrection from some of the ex-Muslims that I see who are fervently defending Israel. But let's get to that in a minute, because I think you and I have both seen that. But I never do the calculus in my head of like, if I say, well, maybe in some circles, but if I say Jewish and I use that identifier, I'm also broadcasting that like I believe in God and metaphysical claims about heaven and hell and all or casting aspersions about what I think about non-Jews, right? Like I worry less about that most times when I use the word Jew, if I decide to use it as an identifier to myself. I want to be able to use it, as you were sort of suggesting, just as sort of like, this will give you a more accurate picture of my upbringing and sort of who I am in my random lottery of life on Earth. But that is getting more complicated in Judaism. And then I think, actually, to throw it back to you, I'm interested. I think everything I just talked through is probably impossible to say the word Muslim, or that's the fight that Islam is going through at the moment, to be able to use that and pick and choose without saying I'm a Muslim and then be immediately being like, oh, you believe in God, right? Like,
yeah, okay, the Muslim thing, again, because of with Judaism, it is locked in. Like, I think it's 23andMe or Ancestry that it'll say you're X% Jewish, right? They'll actually give you a DNA score on that, which is, I found that very bizarre. Okay, right? But so it like saying you're Jewish does have some of that wrapped up into it. But then again, I think about like, okay, well then does Sammy Davis Jr. get the right to claim all that because he converted?
Ask those religious Jews about. Yeah, they would say no.
Okay, but like with the Muslim thing, it is because I have family who were from Yemen that emigrated to Saudi. And I've met them, and for them to be a Muslim is different than my family in India or Pakistan, right? They share a religion in common, but two very separate cultures, except since about 1980, with more money coming in from Saudi, that this gradual change took up until about the end of the 90s, start of the 2000s, then it started getting a little bit more radical and going and changing faster. At a faster rate. So there is no real Muslim culture. There is a specific Arab culture, and then this is something Yaz and I agree on, and other people disagree with us about it. The term Arabization, right? I can understand it as far as language goes because I've seen that in India. They've changed the language a little bit to use more Arabic words than Persian words in Urdu. Just silly things. But the Arabs themselves had their culture wiped out 1,400 years ago by the Quraysh tribe. And it was a specific culture of that tribe that took over the Arabian Peninsula. And now you have things like Somalia being considered an Arab country. And like, what rights is Somalia an Arab country, right? It's just not. But then, they talk about the Arabization of South Asia because you start seeing the hijab, you start seeing more niqabs, you start seeing more guys wearing with the long beards and the skull caps and all that. And yes, it is Arab spreading it, and it is, but it is a specific Arab culture that's being spread. It is because they all had different cultures. And so what you're seeing in South Asia now, and I know I'm getting really off topic, but what you're seeing in South Asia now is what happened to the Arabian cultures 1,400 years ago. Yeah. So to call yourself an Arab, to call yourself a Muslim and say there's like a Muslim identity, I mean, they talk about the ulama, and there was always, help the Muslims wherever you can. I mean, that's how, the Mujahideen, that was a call to get them to come to Afghanistan. I mean, a silly thing, my family, when I went to Bosnia to work with the military, you're going helping out Muslims. And then when I changed from Bosnia to Afghanistan, it's like, you're fighting Muslims. And it's really weird. So there is some kind of, we're all Muslims, so we should help each other. But there's no like real cultural identity. Like to say Jewish, unless, I know people sometimes specifically say Israeli because, they were continuously from there. Or spent, instead of coming, like people who come over from Eastern Europe, those Jewish traditions are not really some of the traditions in Israel. Like, I mean, I don't think they eat, gefilte fish in Israel.
That's starting to splinter in a way of like, it may be, I mean, it may just be a size problem where there's just not that many Jews, and so the term hasn't needed to split itself up. I mean, I'm trying to do it. Like being an American suburban post-Holocaust Jew, third generation now, it's a specific thing that is very different. I'm in Brooklyn, right? Like there's more Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn than all of Israel. Can you call me and my culture as a Jew? Is that like, do I really have anything in common with like the Shlomo who lives across the street, who's probably like my landlord, who went to like a yeshiva and lived a very different life from me? Is it fair to like say that we have something in common as close to just say like we're both Jews? Like the word means different things in different contexts, and in that context, it's hard to point to what I have in common with that person that is more than like I've already mentioned some things. Like if there's someone else from a suburban American city who liked indie music in high school and is a Phillies fan, I probably have more in common on those identifiers than I do with this guy who speaks Yiddish, who lives in East Williamsburg, who, what would we talk about, really? What would he and I really talk about that would connect us immediately? If when I tell him I'm Jewish, he probably assumes something very different than when I tell someone else. So I don't know. The identifier, so it might just be a size issue, though, because I imagine that's what's happening with Muslims, where, what is a Muslim culture? You're literally talking about, someone in Somalia versus someone in, Bangladesh versus in Indonesia versus in Chicago, and what really ties all that, I'm not sure. The Jewish thing does have sort of a line where if that's the only thing you knew about me, you could probably guess some things that were just as far as culturally correct, or where my grandparents came from or whatever. How informative that is, I'm not sure. Yeah. It's a different game, and it's hard to. As one more anecdote, before you answer, because I'm curious about shifting the conversation to what I see as the overcorrection from ex-Muslims who are fervently up in arms and defending this outrage against anti-Semitism, and I told you I feel like there's some overcorrection there. My girlfriend is ex-Muslim. She has no problems using the word as well, and she came home with me to Passover. And the first time she came home with me over Passover, she was looking through my photo albums, and she obviously knows me well. We're in a romantic relationship together, and she was going through my photo albums as a kid. The first time she saw them, and was seeing me in Hebrew high school, and me and my bar mitzvah, and my confirmation, all these things, and she was like, "I didn't know you were so Jewish," right? And so she used the word Jewish because in her sort of analogy, growing up in the tradition she grew up in, it's that there isn't. It's not an analogy of oh, this was totally a non-religious participation in the family, and it was this other totally different thing. So that immediately just not understanding just how, I don't know, unique the Jewish thing is, that you could see all this stuff and be you're really Jewish. And I had to be yeah, my family's super Jewish, but not religious at all. And it's wait, what does that even mean? And then it leads to all these conversations about what does it mean to be Jewish? And it very much is tied into this support Israel no matter what. And any criticism of Israel you ought to be really, really skeptical of, and it's probably anti-Semitism. All the stuff we've been talking about just gets wrapped around that spindle really, really tightly, and then immediately you're oh shit, this is hard to talk about. Yeah.
But okay, I mean, everything else aside, I think you're saying, okay, well, how do I identify myself? If we were having this conversation 10 years ago, let's just say, I don't think that identifier would have been that big an issue, because you could have come up with something generic and said, okay, I'm an American, let's just say, or I'm a New Yorker or whatever, right? But I think because of this importance put on identity now, that you have to become so specific. And it is ridiculous that, someone, you're saying, well, how do I identify myself so that people know where I'm coming from? And I don't think that that's ever going to be possible. We shouldn't have to worry about what is my identity. Why should your identity be a feature of what all your politics, where you stand on social issues, economic issues? Why should that, why does your identity have to be something that describes all that? It could just be, look, I'm an American, or for myself, I consider myself a Canadian. I was born in India, but I moved here when I was 6. I'm 50 now, or I'm going to be 50 this year. I'm a Canadian. I get excited about this stupid beer commercial from the 90s where this guy got up and did this big long rant and said, my name is Joe and I'm Canadian. And it was okay, Canadians get excited over a beer commercial, all right? We get excited over hockey. So all the rest of it, if someone looks at me and goes, okay, you're brown, so you must vote, in this direction, you must support this, you must support that. And they talk to me, and some of those things I do support, some of them I don't. And they're well, how could you not support that, being that, I hear it a lot, like now too, like with Muslims, and I've done this stupid thing myself. And it's like, how can you be gay and say you're Muslim? You know, I understand what Islam says about homosexuality, but if someone's found a way to make that, make that adjustment and rationalize that them to themselves, and they can, they can find some sort of comfort or whatever, more power to them. Like, what I'm trying to get at is, like, I don't think the struggle to find what an identity that tells people exactly what you are. I think, and not you just specifically, but I think all of us should just forget about that and just say, okay, here's what I am. Talk to me about other things. I mean, I'll give you one really bizarre example, and it's just totally kind of funny. I was working in Afghanistan, and there were a lot of French soldiers on the base at the time, and a lot of them would start talking in French around me, at the next table or something, just thinking, okay, he's brown, he doesn't speak French. And then I was working for a French company, and some of the guys from the French, it was coffee break or something, and they would come up, they'd see me, and they'd come sit with me, and they'd start talking French to me. And so these French soldiers, all of a sudden, like, oh my God, he spoke French. And like, what did we say? You can just see it going through their head. Did we say anything that, critical or whatever, right? And it's just like, so, and I mean, I do it. I stereotype people. Everyone does it. You look at someone and you say, okay, this person probably does this, X probably votes Democrat or Republican or whatever, right? But the whole point of it should be to start talking to people. I mean, if you're going to have an identity of any kind, it should just be as an opener to say, yeah, hey, my name's Jay. I'm, like if you're at a cocktail party or something, like, you just introduce yourself and you have a conversation. That's all it should be. I think we're too hung up on what our identity tells about us. Like, I don't know.
Well, that's, of course we are, but I think it's not going to go away. And I'm going to say I don't think it should go away. What should go away is because if someone comes up and says, like, certain identifiers do announce and should announce what they think about things and politics. If someone comes up and says, hey, like, I'm the Grand Knight of the KKK, or like, I'm a proud member, proud neo-Nazi, like, you don't need to be like, oh, cool, like, what do you think about, like, I'm not going to make any judgment based on that. That's like an announcement that carries with it, I mean, proudly in that case, a set of ideas that we can talk about. And that's where it's like, yes, I think it would be lovely if you could come up with if there's identifiers that are void of that, or that should be void of that, and then are not infected by that. That'd be great, right? Like saying, which is what race really ought to be, right? Saying, hey, I'm black. That should be a blank statement, right? It should be like, that doesn't carry with it a bunch of, here's my ideological positions on all this. But that's like saying it's what we've been getting at, of saying, like, can you do that if you say, like, I'm Muslim? What does that carry with it inherently? And should it? And is the whole issue to be like, it carries nothing with it other than just sort of guessing what kind of food that your grandmother served when you went home for holidays, which is nice. It's like a nice conversation. Immediately you could start making jokes with people and you could start having some common ground there. If it just describes your accidental tract in life, but not your ideas, that would be great. I think Islam is, in the word Muslim, is nowhere close to that, the way that Judaism is, which is why it's like, and in some ways that's why it might survive. But that's where, like, me noticing that, oh, that's in trouble. And if that goes away, you've really infected this thing to a point where if I say I'm Jewish and then you're like, here's the politics that come with that, then we're screwed. I don't know, like, how close we are to that, but identity is. I'm a big fan of Amy Chua's book. I've probably mentioned it to you before, Political Tribes, where she makes a pretty compelling and strong case that I'm sort of dancing around, of identity being, not just something that won't go away because it's evolutionary ingrained in us, but maybe it shouldn't. It's like we get a lot of beauty and joy out of identity, and hopefully the whole idea, almost like a Peter Singer thing with the expanding moral arc, or the expanding moral circle, is the challenge is to try to expand our moral circle and our moral identity to where we all identify as just human, or as just sentient creatures, or just the universe itself, something so big where everybody's in your tribe. That's not easy work. I'm a big fan of, as an anecdote, of sport. a lot of these kind of podcasts, people of course know my work in these circles from this film with Sam and Majid, but very few people know about my film about baseball in Uganda. And so Uganda is a place. I am clearly not Ugandan. I know this is just audio, but believe me, I do not look like a Ugandan. I'm not Ugandan. But you go to Uganda, East Africa, which is a part of the world that has fascinating history, obviously, just like everywhere. And, you know, the tribal conflicts and the identifiers that they use with each other are things that are, like, literally invisible to me. And probably to you, like the Buganda tribe that hates the Acholi tribe that hates this tribe or likes this tribe, like the things that happen, like I would never be able to see it. I probably can't even hear the differences in the language, but they are real. They are real deal identifiers there. Like that's real and that's fascinating. And so I made a film about and bad and troubling because that's a thing where your identity obviously becomes a target of your sort of bloodline being good or bad or pure or whatever. And you know, we could talk about Rwanda if you want, but like it's it goes off the rails in ways that make our identity politics anxieties look, you know, like just bitching about nothing. It's quite awful there. And then something like I was working with this baseball program, which is not, you know, a popular game there, and Amy, even in her book, writes about sports as she writes about like super tribes or you know, she talks about nations hopefully being these kind of super tribes, but tribes that almost supersede the local kind of religious tribes or ethnic tribes that get us into all these trouble. It's like if you're on a baseball team in Uganda and you're a Choli and you're the second baseman and you need to turn a double play and your shortstop is from the Buganda tribe or the Nyankole tribe or whatever it is, you don't care. You're on the same team there. It's like sports. I'm a big fan of sport as hopefully a practice to develop new, totally artificial tribes, right? It's just laundry colors. I think Seinfeld used to have a joke about rooting for sports team is like rooting for laundry because it's like we're making up the tribes. But there's a usefulness and utility to the practice of establishing artificial tribes that totally ignore, let's call it like, you know, the real tribes that these kids come from, whether they're religious or whether they're ethnic. And he's on your team now, and you need your teammate to cooperate with you to achieve the goal, which in that case is turning a double play and winning the game and scoring more points than your opponent on the other tribe. So through that practice, can you start to see the absurdity of the other tribes? You know, like, can you start to see the absurdity of saying, I don't like that kid because he's Nyankole, or that's a Muslim family and we're a Christian family, and so we don't get along. But it's like, you realize how ridiculous those things are when the goal becomes scoring more points than the other team. Again, something totally artificial that us humans decide. Then you see just how flimsy those tribes are. And if we could, I mean, that lends itself to a deeper philosophical question. If we could start talking about what's the goal outside of the sport, you know, microcosm that we're talking about, the goal of life and these kind of things, then hopefully if you define those goals as broadly and beautifully as possible, let's just use like an easy scientific one. NASA announced that we're going back to the moon. I actually put out a cool little YouTube video about it. I really like it. That's a cool scientific goal that something like Carl Sagan would be a fan of. We should, you know, we missed the days of the 60s when we all got behind something like that, but there's a goal. Okay, let's do it. We sort of made it up as humans. Let's do it. Let's go to the moon. How do we do it? Well, we're going to have to cooperate and work together. And if you're the engineer who's working on the thrusters, and I'm the engineer that's working on, you know, the nose or whatever, we better do it. We better cooperate on some level. And it doesn't matter that you're brown and I'm white. Let's do this thing. So if we can define our goals outside of the sport analogies and maybe where we can learn some of these things and practice some of these things, then maybe we could start to break down, as you're suggesting we ought to, the absurdity of these stupid identities that just keep getting us into trouble with what it, you know, who you can work with and whose politics are what and all that stuff. So anyway, I don't know how that film will work out, but you know, I'm a big believer in using those kinds of practices to hijack some of that evolutionary residue that we like teams, we like tribes, but let's try to actually build ones that aren't based on these arbitrary ethnic religious lines.
Yeah, no, okay. I mean, a lot of that, you know, I agree with. I mean, yes, I want to know someone is the Grand High Wizard of the KKK. Yes, I do want to know that.
I
But
haven't told that about myself yet.
yeah, or like I'm that someone is high up in the Muslim Brotherhood. I'd
Right.
like to know that as well. But that isn't like being a KKK member or being a Muslim Brotherhood member. That's such a tiny identity. Like it's such a tiny percentage of people who are actually doing that, right? But I was getting more at like, okay, you saying I'm Jewish, and then yes, that has then someone could ask like if you said okay I'm Jewish, someone has said okay are you a Reformed Jew, are you conservative, are you Orthodox, are you Hasidic? Same thing. If I say I'm Muslim and someone say I was still practicing and I was still believing and I said I'm a Muslim, someone then who asked me are you Shia or are you Sunni? At least that shows me that they have that little bit of understanding, and they're trying to figure out okay, because a blanket statement like I am a Muslim, or I am a Jew, or I'm a Christian, or whatever, right? It has so many other variables underneath that yes, you can try to go by that, and that's a way to ascertain what what someone's beliefs are. The whole sports thing. It reminded me in South Africa, and it was like a fictional historical stuff I'd read, and I think they used a real case that had happened, but just changed all the names. And so rugby's a big thing in South Africa.
Invictus. I mean,
no. It was before. It was something I'd read in the early '80s, and so rugby's a big thing, and so you had black players who were given that jersey, and that was still once a year they were allowed to come back, put that jersey on. They were accepted in society because they'd been part of that team, and the whole black thing and white thing didn't take effect there, right? So yeah, if you could take that, and then like you said, let's put it out generally. What do we have common? Let's if we want to have an identity, like we're straight. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, if you don't mind me interrupting, because I want your thoughts on this. This is actually like really crucial. I wrote about this somewhere else, but because when we were talking about our identities, and you want to use Canadian, which might be a really good one right now. It's like, I don't know, there's not a lot that comes with saying you're Canadian right now other than the sort of nice stuff, which is lovely. But as a small anecdote, as an American, I worry about, to bracket this, Amy also talks about nations, like I said, as being potentially really useful and valuable super tribes that can overcome or squelch the lower ethnic religious tribes. So a place like Uganda doesn't have a strong national tribe. You see the flag when you're there, and it makes total sense. It's like, if you ask someone in Uganda, who are you, what are you, like whatever, the identity, you rarely get Ugandan high on the list, honestly. Maybe that's for some geographical reasons as well. But it's also because what does that identifier actually do or mean in the world? Not much, and even to them. And frankly, the identifier of Uganda is like, it's not a great sort of myth about the narrative of what it means to be a Ugandan. To borrow some of Yuval Harari's language, like nations are just myths, right? Like we make them up. They only exist in our heads. If all the humans on Earth died right now and never existed again, Uganda would never be a thing. It's something we're making up. It's like the value of money. So what is that myth made out of? Well, Uganda, it's like, okay, pretty much the British left in 1957, gave us a country, and it's only brought us war and havoc and a shitty dictator. So it's not like a great story anyway. There's some patriotic Ugandans, but they're very aspirational about what it could be or should be or whatever. But then shift that to like America as a super tribe. So actually, to bracket that, that's also probably why if Uganda had a stronger national identity, maybe that would do a lot of work to squelch some of the tribal identities that they're still struggling really being attached to and leading to a lot of political and other kinds of strife. They've never had a team in the World Cup. Maybe they will one day. I think it would be a big event for them. The country would get together, maybe. But sports is an interesting vehicle to tie national identities together, hopefully in a way that is helpful. Obviously, we know it can go wrong as well. But so after 9/11, this question of why do they hate us was everywhere, as we know, and the questions of our identity versus their identity, and these big things were coming out. just on everyone's mind. My parents put an American flag over our garage. It's just a small, little American flag. They put it over our garage, which is something that I would never imagine them doing. They probably would have never imagined them doing in their whole lives. Like, we weren't a very patriotic family. We were living in the very, easy 80s and 90s where we didn't think about this kind of stuff. And then 9/11 hits, and they put an American flag up. Within 3 months, I think, they took it down. Because within 3 months, the symbol of the American flag seemed to suggest, as we're mentioning here, a set of policies, very specifically at that time, probably in favor of the Iraq War or something, that they just didn't subscribe to. And I think that's still held. This is certainly true. If you're on the highway now, I've done sort of this thought experiment before, and I still think it holds true. If you're on the highway now, even I'm in New York, right? So if I'm in New York and I'm driving on the highway and I'll try to eliminate some of the other variables. A car pulls in front of me, let's say not a pickup truck, it's just a regular sedan, so like a Toyota or something, and it's got an American flag bumper sticker on the back. Do I immediately start associating certain political guesses, as you're saying, stereotypes, to the driver of that car based on just the American flag on the back? If I had to guess, if you put a gun to my head and said, guess who that person in front of you voted for in the last election, I would guess Donald Trump to save my life. Would you? Would most people here? I bet they would. I might be wrong. But the fact that symbol, the American flag, suggests that, is the only, if given the only information I have, let's say they have a pickup truck, I'm a little more confident in my guess, other things, but just the flag, I'm going to guess Trump. I think that's a problem, and I'm fearful of it. I'm wondering now, with the Judaism thing and the symbols that we're talking about, because when we're talking about identity, we're talking about symbols. A lot of times we're talking about linguistic symbols, but we're also talking about visual symbols. I'm talking about the American flag. When you're talking about cartooning and art and what's anti-Semitic or not, you're talking about symbols. Back to that New York Times cartoon in question. The Star of David being around the neck of the dog, or the yarmulke as a symbol, or whatever. If I'm behind a car on the highway and I see a Star of David on the car in front of me, I'm not sure what I think of that person, honestly, and I don't know what that symbol means. If I see it around someone's neck, like, I'm not sure at the moment what the symbol of that means. I don't know if there's an analog to this in Islam, because drawing the Prophet has been so outlawed. You could wear the crescent or this or that. Seeing a hijab is certainly a symbol that you can associate.
Okay, or I've seen it. They'll have I've seen bumper stickers and stickers on dashboards of the crescent moon.
Okay, yeah. What do you think? I'm really curious.
Okay, if I see that, okay, this person's a Muslim. How Muslim are they?
Yeah,
and again, when I say how Muslim are they, like how strictly do they believe? Like, in my house, in my apartment, mainly because I was overseas most of the time I've owned this place, and my mom was technically homeless, so it's a long story. She wasn't really homeless people, but I said, just live in my place, and it's downtown. So there's a lot of Arabic calligraphy. There's things that I bought her. I bought her like some a verse from the Quran that this guy had done in Turkey, done it on the leaf of some plant, and it's like really beautifully done and looks really nice. And I got that for her. So if I see something, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're religious. So I know that, but what does it mean by them having just the crescent moon? Like, I would think that they are more religious than others. I would think that they would hold more strictly to the faith, but does that mean that they're going to force their daughters and wives and whatever into niqabs?
No,
maybe not. Yeah, but like I said, there is in North America. It's a little different because I think that the Muslim population in both the United States and Canada is smaller than the Jewish population.
And you know what really complicates this, and this again is like it was intentional at all. It's just so complicated with Judaism. Is that symbol is on the flag of Israel. In fact, someone took up my challenge and really tried to do it with the dog of that cartoon, and there I could can send it to you when I'm done. I forget who it was. It was just someone random on Twitter, but I appreciate them trying to take up the effort. And when they were playing with it in their like little version of Photoshop, they changed what was around the dog's neck to sort of just a circle, but it was now the Israeli flag, which looks almost identical, but it had the two blue bars at the top and then the Star of David in the middle. And it was like just that little shift was interesting. But like again, this wasn't probably intentional by the state of Israel, but to put the symbol of the religion or a symbol of the religion on your flag immediately starts to blur the lines between criticizing the religion versus criticizing the state. This Pakistan, of course, is the analog here that did the same exact thing, right? It's like whether that's intentional or not, or just a happy accident, it definitely is a statement that becomes provocative. I mean,
okay, but sorry, don't mean to cut you off. But when you mentioned that, like when you talked about the bumper sticker with the Star of David, I wanted to ask you then, like, well, it could mean they're Israeli.
It could mean they're Israeli, exactly. Like, and that becomes then like, wait, can I criticize Israel without criticizing? And then it's a really big challenge for a cartoonist to be like, how do you criticize Pakistan without like using the crescent? Yeah. Or if you do, you're going to get a whole bunch of Muslims coming after you, calling you an Islamophobe. Yeah. Like, so this is also why that analogy of the like, leave alone the Charlie Hebdo thing, but of feeling like there's an overcorrection from some ex-Muslims, you would think there would be. I couldn't. If you can send me a cartoon of someone criticizing like mullahs or whatever, certain imams in Pakistan who preach stuff, and they drew a cartoon lambasting this person as some like awful, ridiculous thing, or some warmonger or something, and used the crescent, I'm sure it's out there.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah, and if somebody got up in arms calling it like, this is Islamophobic, this is total anti-Muslim bigotry because look, like you drew the crescent and maybe there's like a big nose or a beard on this guy, and this is like, to me, I just want some of the ex-Muslims out there to understand. I know Judaism is unique, and that's what we've been talking about here, and maybe unique for good reasons. That's how they sound like to me when they criticize this cartoon, being like, what did you want him to do? He's trying to criticize specifically the religious thing. So he's using the Star of David, and looks like
I get it. Okay, but I'll describe you one cartoon, and I think it was done by Signe Wilkinson. Okay. I could be wrong, but it was really funny. It was three women in niqabs walking down a catwalk, and it was like misogyny, Miss Can't Drive, Miss Waiting to Learn How to Read, and then a couple of mullahs sitting in the audience, and it was like the Miss Islam Beauty Contest or something like that, right? And so they were all in niqabs, and you had the mullah sitting up front. You didn't have the crescent moon. Now, I found that very funny because and it's sad because that is the state of women in a lot of Muslim majority countries. I can get where you're coming from with the overcorrection thing, on the Xmas, and I'll get back to that in a second. But I want, like, the thing with the American flag, like, what does that mean? I think part of the problem here is we are ascribing to symbols. We are letting the worst of the other side gain ownership of symbols, and we're giving them up. It's like the stupid thing, like the OK symbol. That's white power. Yeah. And that started off as a 4chan piece of crap, right? And then there was this. There was an article out the other day. A school in Chicago delayed the yearbook coming out because they had to edit out a picture of some guy making that hand thing. And there was the one at the Cubs game where the guy, and I'm like,
hand for life or something.
Or now they're saying, okay, look out for people with the thumbs up emoji in their Twitter profile because because apparently that's now also white supremacist. Jeez. Okay, now why are you letting people? I think the OK sign is kind of universal. Everyone around the world uses that.
It's just exhausting. I don't know. Like, I'm with you with like, why are you letting? Because are you saying my parents should have kept the flag up and then been like, and maybe I should have been like, no, keep the flag up. Like, fuck that. If someone challenges you, be like, no, I don't support this like Bush administration move. Like, but that's my country.
Exactly.
I mean, go fuck yourself.
The first time I heard about something like this, I was 14 and I was visiting my uncle in Switzerland, and my aunt is German. So we'd gone to Stuttgart where her mother lives. And then I was with her, with her mom, and I was walking around. We were walking around Stuttgart, and she pointed out, okay, this house has a French flag, this house has this. She goes, but if anyone put up a German flag, we're called Nazis. And this was West Germany at the time, right? So it was still split into East and West Germany. And at 14, I found that so insane. Like, what do you mean? You put up a flag and automatically you're a Nazi? I said, it's not even, it wasn't a swastika or anything. It was a West German flag.
Yeah.
So I've always found this kind of stuff ridiculous. And that's what I'm saying. Like, why are you letting them take ownership of a symbol that, if you're a proud American, and you can be a proud American and dislike everything your president's doing.
Yeah.
You can still respect your country and say, I wish my country would get back to this. I don't like my president. And you're not, like one of these people like, oh, he's not my president. Be it, the last two, like Trump or Obama. You had people on either side saying, not my president. No, okay, but I'm an American. Okay, well, if you're an American, then you have to accept the fact that he's your president. That's in your Constitution, for Christ's sakes. So I'm saying, if we want to have identity, if we want to have that, don't let other people ruin it for you.
That's, well, to a certain degree, yeah, but to a certain degree, at some point, symbols are, again, they're most often their utility is to broadcast externally to the community. So at some point, this is almost like brings me back to, I was lucky enough to have John McWhorter and Stephen Pinker on stage with me, and we ended up talking about linguistics. And actually, Coleman Hughes, who's my co-host on my new project, asked them about this term Latinx, which I had never heard. None of us actually on stage had heard. See, you've heard of it, apparently.
Yeah.
None of us had heard of it, but it was apparently, if I'm explaining it correctly, a term that, because Latina and Latino are gendered, which is just sort of an accident of Spanish, I suppose, it was to try to come up with a non-gendered identifier for someone of Latin descent, if I'm getting this all correct, Latinx. And we were all sort of none of us were a fan of this game, but they were like, listen, it's not up to us, actually. If this catches on, then fucking fine. It's not up to us. It's whatever works. Language is fluid and symbols are fluid. So, to your point, I'm thinking of the Confederate flag. We've been talking about the American flag, the Israeli flag, the Canadian flag, what they mean, what they might mean, what they should mean. Japan had the imperial flag, which you don't see anymore. Germany had their flag. They all become interesting symbols. Where then something like the Confederate flag is so complicated and becomes this hot button issue because you're like, is this almost like when I was mentioning to you of if I use the identifier that I'm in the KKK, you're allowed to subscribe, you're allowed to put ideology in it and then disagree with it outright. Or I could say no, I'm not that kind of KKK member. You'd be like, well then, what's your fucking problem? The Confederate flag might have its own legacy woven into it that is just too tied to it, where it's actually you can't have that one, and flying that one announces something that I know what you wanted to do, but it's not up to you actually. The Confederate flag is an interesting one.
But I think there's a difference between post 9/11 the American flag and the Confederate flag. Like you said, the Confederate flag but I mean, in this day and age, it has a history behind it and has certain connotations attached to it that you're never going to get rid of. And I'm not arguing one way or another whether you should or not. But the American flag, if you it's now almost a fait accompli that it's given up, that if you have it, you're this ultra nationalistic right wing. And I'm saying, let's stop. Let's not give the other side that power over these symbols, because symbols do have power. But you should be able to show your patriotism or your love for your country, regardless of where you are, without that connotation. But I mean, it's like I said, it's starting to get attached to everything. You're starting to, everything needs a symbol, or you can't have those symbols. Or to me, it's just another form of censorship. It's just, and it's stupidly based.
But I'm saying it just gets it's exhausting, because if you want to be the one fighting for the symbol, you're the one who's going to have that conversation all the time.
Yeah, I know. If
I'm the one who wants to retake the American flag as because to your point, I do consider myself patriotic, and if someone's like, what does that mean? Because even that is like a linguistic symbol where it's like, are you a Trump fan? It's like, if I want to have that conversation, it's like, no. Actually, Jill Lepore has a great book out called These Truths that I've read about a bit of. It's a really long book. I really want to finish it, but it's a history of America, and rather it seems comprehensive and ambitious, but sets out like if I want to say I'm patriotic or what that means to me, it's like, well, what America's striving for, the ideals of America as I define them, or maybe as the founders sort of first designed that symbol and wove in all of these ideas, is a as we were talking about before, like a goal that is worthy. It's a worthy goal to aim for what America is striving for, the beacon on the hill kind of thing. We're clearly not there. We weren't there when the start of her book is like when on page 1 they're printing the Constitution. I think it was a newspaper that printed the preamble and the Bill of Rights, and it's like all men are created equal. And then on page 4 there's like a slave auction. Like clearly this has always been a struggle of like, here's the ideal. That's what America, you hope the symbol is like, this is what we're striving for. And we've written this down in this beautiful document. It's not perfect, but here it is. And we're nowhere close, but we're trying to get there. Like, and if that's what I want that symbol to mean to me, which it is, and what I hope it does, then yeah, I would love to re-own the flag. But I'm the one, if I'm walking around Brooklyn with an American flag t-shirt and I get stopped by someone assuming I'm a Trump supporter or something, I'm the one who has to have this long conversation that I just had with you. And frankly, that just gets a little exhausting sometimes. So even like my last name, Shapiro, is this symbol of like, oh, you're Jewish. And it's like the times that I've wanted to just strip the last name away and be like, do I need to tell you? Because it's like, I'm the one who has to have this conversation. Maybe it's gotten a little better, but in a lot of parts of the world, it's like, Shapiro, oh, so you think like Israel should own the Middle East or something? Yeah. And then like, all right, I need to tell you what my last name means to me. And if I said I'm Jay Shapiro and I'm Jewish, that's a little different. But like the symbols that we carry around, willingly or not, are the one. Maybe that's the most annoying ones that we're talking to are the symbols that I don't get any choice in. I could change my last name, I suppose, but if someone's telling me I can't become an ex-Jew, then like, these are problematic symbols. This is the start of the problem. If it's like, if this is an identity that you cannot choose to no longer subscribe to, then we have a real issue with those identifiers.
Yeah, okay. And again, like I'm not asking anyone to go back and go back and take back the American flag, but like I'm saying, let's nip it in the when you see this kind of stuff starting.
So that's what I'm trying to do with it.
Yeah, okay. Unfortunately, I think you're at I think you're further behind on this one than you are on the American flag.
I don't know how to rescue Judaism from its own self anyway, because I'm not religious. Like, what does it mean to be Jewish in a way that I would actually defend and promote? I'm an atheist, so already you've lost me at all of that. Most of it you've lost me at, honestly. So
the metaphysical.
Like, I'm not the best defender of that one for you.
Anyway, I just want to because I said I'd come back to this. The ex-Muslim overcorrection when it comes to anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
I think, and I mean, I've at times flippantly done it myself, and it's more on the things of I'd see things like gays for Palestine, or LGBTQ against Islamophobia, or when the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain walked in the Pride Parade wearing a sign, holding a sign saying Allah is gay, and then they were threatened to not be allowed back to the next year's parade. See, like I see things like that, and like I said, the Palestine, the gays for Palestine. It's, again, Douglas Murray, just because I found this, with the way he put it very funny. It's like if gays were for Palestine, were in Palestine, they'd have to go to Israel, because like it's. So I can see some of that, but I think a lot of it is to do with we know exactly where the anti-Semitism comes from. Even like Mehdi Hassan, who when he wrote this, I was so surprised that he wrote it. And he said, Islam's dirty little secret, or Muslims' dirty little secret, Islamic anti-Semitism. And like my grandfather, I don't think my grandfather ever met a Jew in his life, and this is in India, and he would. something bad happened, like, and he would use the Urdu term, which is also the Arabic term, and it's like Yodia, oh, the Jews, and just it was just it was there. So we see it. So maybe we're hypersensitive to it coming from like an Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib, right? If we're perceiving it too much. Like I said, I've kind of veered away from that because I equate it to like the Uncle Leo and Seinfeld. Oh, they brought me a sandwich on whole wheat instead of rye. They're anti-Semitic. Like everything is anti-Semitic, right? And a lot of ex-Muslims, and I think it's also because the ex-Muslim thing, especially, a few years ago, mosques would say that there is no such thing as an ex-Muslim. They don't exist. Now they're having, at least in North America, ISNA is holding conferences all about the ex-Muslim problem. So they're aware of it. So like there's a lot more being more open about it, and there's a lot more new apostates. And I think they are, it's like, and nothing, I'm not criticizing people who have just apostatized or recent, ex-Muslims, but like converts to the religion, or people who start going to college and taking feminist studies and all of a sudden become an SJW, or the other side, the red pilled or the woke or what, like any of that crap. It's like people with a new toy. So they're okay, and especially like when you've left the religion, there is a lot of anger involved in it, especially depending with something like Islam, like how deep you were in it. Yeah. So there's a lot of anger, especially like all the things you missed out and all that. So they're lashing out against everything against it, and I find like I see it more in younger or newer ex-Muslims than I do in people. Like I said, I've been an atheist since I was 16. It's not it's not part of my daily existence. It's not like I don't try to make it to be anyways. So I can see where they're getting that, and I think that's where that overcorrection is from. Is they are rebelling against everything from the religion, and so this gets added into it. I know I'm not agreeing that it's a good thing. I'm not saying it is, but I think that
there's a bit of that. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, kind of. Yeah. If I got that right just now, like, there's a bit of that happening, and like let me get a few things just totally crystal clear. Like, anti-Semitism is a huge problem, and there's a version of it in Islamic anti-Semitism that is really, really problematic and prevalent. I mean, I've heard it everywhere. I've seen it everywhere. That is real. Yeah. So like, I'm not trying to say that anti-Semitism is not real. My simple criticism is just not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, and specifically, we need to be able to criticize Israel's religious right and its influence over American politics as Americans without being accused of being anti-Semitic. If we don't, because this is what I feel like a teenager again, if we don't and if we can't, that hypocrisy is the thing that will kill Judaism. It's not interfaith marriage or another Holocaust. It's the hypocrisy of blasphemy laws. And Judaism prides itself on being this like religion that's really about open discourse. There's all those jokes. I think everyone has them of like 2 Jews, 3 opinions kind of stuff. Like they all pride themselves in that kind of stuff. But when it comes to Israel, it's like 2 Jews, and you certainly can't have this opinion. You know what I mean? It's like this is the hypocrisy that runs counter to everything else in it, except if it's this victimhood narrative that everyone's always trying to kill us, so we have to survive, and we're going to have to like be kind of assholes to do it. As one more before you answer, like because about overcorrections, because this is so personal actually, and I don't mean to be so abstract. I have a great uncle who he died years ago, but he was a very strong man, and he was in Auschwitz and survived. I won't probably get all the numbers correctly. The entire family was killed. He lost his entire family. He was the only one that survived. He went in as a teenager, and he only survived because he was like super strong, and they kept using him for sort of like manual labor. So he survived the entire World War II, and none of his family did. And then there he was in Europe in post-World War II as this surviving Jew, and there's this new country called Israel, and he was like, fuck it, I'm going. He had nothing, right? His whole family's dead and gone, and like, that's it, I'm going. And he was angry. Talk about overcorrection. After you saw all that, he was angry. Probably rightfully so, right? Like you're in a pretty fucking rough world when that happens. And he told me this years and years later when I was just this teenager, and I remember it was in Pittsburgh at my relative's house. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and he told me, I was asking him about those years, and he went to Israel, and he joined the army, which was like semi-mandatory at that time. And as we all know, war was declared on Israel basically the day that Israel was declared. And he was like, I went to Israel and I just killed a bunch of brown people. And he said it to me like that. He's like, I was just angry and I killed a lot of brown people. And that's part of the story that doesn't get told a lot. And he was an old man when he told me this, and he had all kinds of confusion, of course, and remorse, and felt just conflicted about it all. But he was, at least years and years later, able to look back on the psychology of having this entire family ripped away from him and killed, and then here's these new people who want us dead too. Like, fuck it, now I have a gun, right? The Germans took my guns away and put me in a camp. Now I've got a weapon, and I'm fighting back. And these are the people in front of me, so they're the ones who are going to get the brunt of my anger. Like, that's a scary mentality to be in. And we all should admit that's an extreme version of it, of course, but like we should all admit that it's real and that we're susceptible to that and that there's real consequences to that. I'm, of course, not at all suggesting that the overreaction to cartoons by ex-Muslims is similar, but there is this natural... I've always pointed to this as, I think, the hardest thing to sort of swallow psychologically is to admit that you've been duped by something. You and I talked about this before, we see overcorrections from people who feel like they were duped by the left, like Dave Rubin, who maybe find themselves on the other end of the thing. We see it all the time everywhere, being duped and being then really angry at the people who duped you. And I think there's some ex-Muslims who feel that they were duped by Islam in some way and are overcorrecting and maybe have a line who like to use Israel as a thumb in the eye, as it were, to some of these real, genuine, awful anti-Semites who are doing work. And that's good, like that's psychologically explainable, but we just have to admit that there is a certain percentage, a small percentage of religious Jews, fervently religiously Zionist Jews, who want the entire Middle East, or want at least to the river because they want their Messiah to come back. I mean, it's just as crazy as you would think it would. Who love that, benefit from that, and maybe now are using those ex-Muslims overcorrection as a bit of a useful idiot that they didn't wish to be. And they have become immune. I'm sure atheists out there don't want any religious maniacs to be immune to their criticism. I'm pointing to one very specifically, and if they tell me I'm wrong, again, the challenge stands. Draw the cartoon. Show it to me. Just draw it. I dare you. Send it to the New York Times. Send it to your boss. We'll see how well that goes.
Just a couple of things on that. Like, okay, yes, and that's what I was trying to get at. Like, I'm not agreeing with these ex-Muslims. I'm just trying to say why they might be overcorrecting to that point, right? Like, I believe there are plenty of things you can criticize Israel for, but I think from your point, and I'm not saying that you do this or whatever, but if your argument in itself is, if someone's saying, okay, any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic,
yeah, I
think it's the same thing with like ex-Muslims or people who speak out against Islam in general. But let's make our criticisms valid. Yeah. Let's criticize it in a way that, and then you're still going to have people that say, oh, you're going after all Jews, you're being anti-Semitic, you're being Islamophobic or whatever. But let's up our game. Let's make valid criticisms. Like the people who say, oh, look, Israel's, the latest rocket attacks. Oh, Israel blew up an orphanage, or Israel killed a girl in a hospital. Right. And it turned out it was actually a Hamas rocket that killed her, but no one really made that much noise about that, right? Right. It's like, the reason Israel ends up, and again, like, I'm not defending one thing or another, but I'm just trying to, like, Hamas uses children as shields.
Yes.
So, yes, Israel might have, in a retaliation to a rocket attack that they're very well protected against, thankfully so. Like, I don't want to see anyone killed, but they retaliate and ended up killing some children and women.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this critically. Yes, it was wrong of women and children were killed, but should Hamas have placed weapons where women and children are?
Yeah.
Israel should not retaliate. It's like, so what? They have no.
Those kind of criticisms, of course, are deranged and probably anti-Semitic and really, really illogical. I think I'm trying to specifically point to the settlements a lot because it seems to be this thing that everyone agrees on being like, that shit's not helpful. Right? Like, I don't know if you've seen them, if you've been there and you've seen it, but it's for anyone who hasn't been there. It's like you go, as an American, I could do it. You go like to Ramallah, like from Jerusalem, and you go through the checkpoints. And the checkpoints themselves we could talk about, and there's certain dehumanizing and seemingly unnecessary steps of like making old people with canes walk instead of go through the thing. That there's a good amount of older Palestinians who refuse to go through the checkpoints just because they're like, I won't be treated like an animal, and I sort of respect that sort of stance. But then of course there's the defense of like it's for self-defense, etc. But the settlements, like you're going through and you're on your way, like I was doing some filming at Birzeit University, and I was on my way to Ramallah, and it's you cross the border, and you're in the West Bank, and it's desert, and sort of, there's little settlements here, little settlements there. You can see the Palestinian ones, and it's just like people living there and farming and doing whatever they're doing, and then like Ramallah's kind of a nice little city there, and it's got its own thing going on. And then you look off, and there's like a road that only Israelis could drive on, and it's guarded, heavily guarded with a gate, going up onto a hill with this entirely gated community with a huge wall around it and barbed wire around everything and towers and really, really like nicely constructed homes in this little cluster on a hill and a road that only the people who live there could go on that goes into Israel. And you just look at it and you're like, that shit's not helpful, right? And like everyone could sort of agree on this. Sam Harris, someone who, of course, when he wrote about Israel, makes all these nuanced defenses as you and I want to, that of course they should be defending themselves. The fact that they try to go out of their way not to kill civilians, where Hamas does the exact opposite, should tell you everything you know about the moral calculus, of course. But even he is like, the settlements, by the way, are not helping anyone. So it's like, I'm like speaking specifically about, I think you should be able to criticize the settlement. I mean, this should be able to be done in the New York Times. Criticize the settlements and the religious argument for the settlements, because most people living there are those kinds of Jews, because who the fuck else would want to live there, honestly? It's like a crazy place. Criticize them in the New York Times, and Netanyahu, obviously knowing the political advantage of having them there, and the influence over American politics to, kiss the ring, as it were, of that policy has to be valid. But immediately you can even hear me hedging of like, you immediately get into this like conspiracy theory that the Jews are controlling the world. And so if that's the thing that we can't touch, like the Middle East is doomed to a lot more dead kids. Like that's where we're at. And actually, to put one more thing in here, what's actually the most exposing and just the biggest shame is, I think you saw me tweet about it, of the very little uprising in Palestine, well, in Gaza particularly, against Hamas that happened a few months ago, mostly because of economic reasons and pointing out the corruption of Hamas that was quickly just squelched by Hamas itself.
And no one reported on it.
Almost got no coverage. And that is fucked up. I mean, that was out of everything that's happened in the Israel-Palestine debacle since 1940s, that was the most hopeful piece of news that I had seen in a long time, of like, oh yeah, this is the people you should be supporting. And the silence of that from the people you've mentioned, like Ilhan Omar, other people, or even major news organizations, is criminal. And it should expose and reveal all you need to know about possibly their true motivations and their anti-Semitism. So, and maybe that's something to point out with like the New York Times. It's like, where was your cartoon about that? They should have had one, sure. Where was your coverage about that? Frankly, I don't know. I think they probably did cover it. But like, that is a huge thing, a huge development, which should have gotten a lot more attention. And probably not to be conspiratorial about the other side, probably was a reason that Hamas started firing some rockets to change the news cycle of like, oh, remember who the real bad guy is? Look, you hate Israel, right? And they were like, okay, fine, right? Like, here we are again.
No, but that's just, and again, like, okay, the settlements, yeah, there's plenty of problems there. I mean, I just brought up the Hamas thing because it was just recent with the rocket attacks, right? But huge problems with the settlements. But there's also internal things, like, and again, it's not, maybe I should follow it more, but you can't follow everything. And, it's, so, I mean, I see news reports come out like, oh, they're discussing limiting voting rights for certain people, like, Arabs and things like that. I don't know enough about it. But then again, that's an internal policy that you can, like, if the Trump's Muslim ban, like all the, articles about that, if there is something legitimately going on like that, and I mean, for such a small country, it gets a lot of news. But so if you're getting all that coverage, if there are bad policies like that, make valid criticisms of them. Don't, again, I get where you're coming from, and I understand like what you're talking about, and I agree with all of it. It's just, but I'm saying, like, if I want to criticize Israel, I should do it. I should try to do it in a way that I want to criticize Islam, right? Like, the way I want to criticize Islam is, like, I don't want my family hurt. I don't want myself to be beat up by some racist because I said some stuff about Islam, and he sees me and he doesn't know who I am, and like, I don't want any of that. Like, I don't want anyone hurt. I don't want my Jewish friends hurt. I wouldn't want you hurt because I said something stupid about Israel, and I incited, however unlikely it is that something I said incites someone to go kill someone, right? But that's what I'm saying. I think, like, if better criticism starts coming out, and if people who always claim anti-Semitism, right? And I'm not saying Barry Weiss does, and if you hear this, Barry, sorry, but she should come out with her own criticism of Israel.
I hope she does. I think she will in her book. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Barry as well. We're connected quite closely. Yeah.
No, but so I mean, like I said, it's I think on a lot of these things, and I know it's like you said, it's you can't fight everything, and it's hard to always be the one who does that thing. But I think, like, if we want to be able to criticize Israel or Islam or anything in general, like, we should put out the critiques the way we like.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why, I do like Sam's piece on criticism of Israel. And Madrid has a great, I still reference it. It was like this internal dialogue that he wrote during one of the recent Gaza flarings up, where it was really good. I don't know if you've read it. It was sort of like the Palestinian voice in his head. He did like a little play between two voices, one Israeli and one Palestinian. It was quite good, and I thought quite balanced and nuanced. And you're right. We should put out that criticism, which is why I was like, put out the cartoon challenge of like, okay, show me what it is, because like I could try to draw one if you want. I actually don't even know what it would be either, because that's my point is, like, if I can't think of anything that I wouldn't immediately get lambasted. And maybe, and this goes almost to an interesting point about like the role of who should do the criticisms, right? Majid, as a reformer and critic of Islam, or even someone like yourself, are you in a better position to do it than I am because of your name and your upbringing and your familiarity with it? Maybe you are. Like, maybe you're the better firefighter there, and maybe it is up to me with Shapiro, because could I get away with it for a while? Although I might get called a self-hating Jew really quickly, and then, because that's another trope of the, like, well, Ayan gets that, being like, well, she had a bad experience with Islam.
Yeah, so, or, like your native informant, house Muslim, Uncle Tom.
So it buys you like a 5-minute window before that comes out.
Okay, but I mean, like, I'll give you another example, and this is, I was in Afghanistan when the Danish cartoon thing started really getting heated up. And it was one of the most scared I ever was in Afghanistan, because you had people, I was in Kabul, I was the NATO headquarters, a very small base, not the hugest fortifications, but it was fortified at least. But you had people running up to the base because there was Danish soldiers on there, and there was Danish flags flying off the base. So you had that. And then about 6 months later, there was another, rockets going back and forth from Gaza into Israel. And there was a lot of ramp up to this. And so the mullahs got people excited. So No one charged the base or anything, but there was a larger number of people protesting in the streets. Again, they have no clue what a Jew is. They have no clue about Israel. They don't. Okay, they're hurting Muslims. That's what they were told, and they were, they went out on the streets to protest this. So it's, a lot of the protests you see from Muslim countries, and I'm not, what I said of everything about the anti-Semitism and everything. It's there. They're told to kill Jews even though they don't know who they are. But this was whipped up by the mullahs, right? They're using it for their advantage, however way they see it. I mean, the Danish cartoons, if it wasn't for the mullahs making up the two worst ones were made up by the mullahs, right? Muhammad as a pig, and I can't remember what the other one. They were done by the mullahs specifically to incite violence. So, like I said, I could see this, but it's easy to rile up. I was just trying to compare the two because it was very easy to rile them up about the cartoons of Muhammad, but it's also easy for them to get a crowd rallying them up against Jews because the Jews are killing Muslims, because it is chronically based. And again, this is, I think, going back. Maybe I'm trying to, because like I said, I started using the ex-Muslim thing a few years ago. Maybe I'm trying to, throw some shade my way or whatever. I can see why young ex-Muslims, why they do that overcorrection. Because they see it, they saw it, and they're lashing out against every part of that religion, so they're lashing out against that. So they will freak out that cartoon is anti-Semitic, or they will freak out that someone who says, "Oh, Israel kills babies," and whatever, or someone who complains about the settlements, why are all these Israelis going back? Why are all these Jews going back to Israel and all that? And when they'll bring up other points too, which are valid, like where are the Jews in the rest of the Middle East? What happened to them all? And these are valid questions, but again, they're making their criticisms through the lens of their anger at their former religion, and I think that's where a lot of that's coming from.
Yeah, I'm not sure where to how we would find our way through it or out of it. I guess I'll say, like, with Judaism, and just like what it has come to mean as a target. I don't want to talk about Barry Weiss anymore, but her appearance on Bill Maher was great, and her description of anti-Semitism was really sharp, in that it is not only sort of a stereotype of a certain ethnicity and a certain kind of old school racism happening there, but it's also a conspiracy theory. That's a really, really interesting and valid point, and makes it unique, and it makes it probably unique in the world at the moment, and makes it hard to criticize, because every time that I've been trying to do it here, the only alarm bell that goes off in my mind is this, like, the Jews control the world kind of conspiracy theory, and that's the one that becomes really, really hard to point out. I could give you some, like, why I think that is there. In the analogy of Jews as the chosen people, as a small group of people who are chosen by God, who aren't necessarily trying to go out and proselytize. Like you were telling the story of your father's funeral, he's using this opportunity to try to bring more people into the fold. Jews don't really do that. It's not about, like, we need more of us. They're actually like, no, we're good. We're good with how many we are. And they just happen to also be quite successful in a lot of countries they're in. So, like, from the outside, it certainly looks like they're like, there's a small group of people over there who have a lot of money and influence, and they don't want me to join their cool club. So, like, I think there's something shady happening over there. Like, that's how these conspiracy theories start. Whereas the Muslims are coming up to your lunch table and being like, hey, come sit with us. We're really cool. And you're like, nah, that's cool. Like, I'm too cool for you guys. Or like, you guys don't look like you have that fun. Your toys aren't that fun. The Jews have all those cool toys, and they don't want me to join their club. Like, what's happening over there? And then suddenly you get these awful conspiracy theories that happen. So, like, to given that psychology in the world, of, like, South Park pokes fun at it really, I think, with brilliant satire in their entire series. Hartman being the, like, stereotypical anti-Semite who's sure that Kyle has Jew gold hidden somewhere. And you saw the episode where, like, he finally... from his neck or whatever, and it's like, show me your Jew gold. It's like, it's funny because it's so absurd, right? Cartman's an absurd, stupid character. That's why he's funny, that he has this dumb idea and they play into it. But that's real, as you know. Like, the Islamic version of anti-Semitism is Cartman. That's why it's so fucking ridiculous. Like, where is the Jew gold? They're hiding it. Like, the Rothschilds still have it or something. It's crazy. But so, like, how do you, like, do people think Cartman is anti-Semitic, or has that gone so far that the satire is so obvious that, like, you know what the joke is? Like, you know, I love cartoons. Again, I love satire, and I love this form of I think it's really important work to do. I mean, that would be an interesting one to consider, of, like, is the Cartman thing, it's so obviously anti-Semitic that it's no longer anti-Semitic. But what do you do about trying to point out some kind of, like I've been trying to do, of criticism of not the orchestrators of that situation, because that would be a conspiracy theory, but the situation we actually find ourselves in, of that Netanyahu is a smart fucking dude. He knows what these settlements do. He knows that if he could shield the expansion of settlements and the people who actually want to fucking live in these ridiculous places from criticism, because any criticism of them is out of bounds and gets you fired and called a bigot, like, you don't have to call that a conspiracy theory to just notice it, call it politics, and criticize it the way that we criticize other politics. And that's what I keep pointing to, of being like, is that now impossible? I'm struggling as someone to be able to do it. So if we're in that situation, it's a bad situation. And that's my whole sort of, like, I don't know how to thread that needle other than point at it of, like, oh, the needle hole is actually closed.
I'll give you all that, and like I said, I think especially
maybe it's, actually, just even before you answer it, maybe it's not that big of a problem. Like maybe that's the better thing, and, like, the calculus is being like, Jay's probably right about this specific point, and maybe I'm overreacting because I grew up in that environment and grew up with the frustration of a teenager being like, what the fuck? Why can't we criticize this one thing? But maybe in the world it's like, you know what, Jay's right, but anti-Semitism, and especially Islamic anti-Semitism, is actually a huge threat, and so, like, let's just put that thing aside that he's talking about for a minute. The Palestinians will continue to sort of get fucked, but, like, we got bigger fish to fry right now. That might be the calculus, and if that's the calculus, I don't really have an answer to it other than, like, yeah, you're probably right, but let me at least point out this specific blasphemy. So should people not make these cartoons because there's bigger fish to fry? Maybe. And if that's the argument, I feel like it's a different argument than that, hey, the cartoon's anti-Semitic. Just being like, oh, just don't make the cartoon because we have other things to do.
Well, no, I disagree with both of those. I don't think.
Okay,
I think, you know, I have always said it. If you find something is wrong, speak out about it. I hate this whole stay in your lane garbage. You can't talk about it because you're not X. Oh, yes. Screw that. If you think it's wrong, talk about it. And I think the cartoon should be allowed because, the cartoon did start a conversation. I mean, not just this one between the two of us, but all over the place. But I don't think there should be blasphemy laws. I don't think any pseudo blasphemy laws, or you can't criticize Israel because if you criticize Israel as anti-Semitic, or, like you said, the self-hating Jew. Like, I keep going back to this friend of mine in Montreal. I see some of the stuff she criticizes Israel, and half of it's in, like, replies to her in Hebrew, and I do the translate, and I get this garbled translation, but the gist of it is just so horrific. Like, and criticism should be allowed. It is, that's the whole essence of free speech, is the right to criticize.
And this goes to our, like, if I was going to criticize some specific aspect, well, this was what the Republicans were with the with us or against us thing, why my parents took down the flag, to bring it back to that, of, like, if I wanted to criticize the Bush administration's Iraq invasion specifically for all kinds of reasons, does that mean I hate America? Does that mean I'm against America? Is this a with us or against us thing? Like, it's as you've been suggesting, this, like, black and white, all or nothing view of the world is just getting us into so much trouble. No. So, yeah, like, we should be able to criticize it and still be pro-Israel. Like, if I criticize Israel's expansion of settlements, or I think the religious right are nut jobs who have too much influence in Israel and then via Israel-American politics. This doesn't mean I want Israel wiped off the face of the earth. This doesn't mean I support Hamas. Like, the people who go to those extremes just have to sort of be ignored in the conversation. Like you're saying, like, don't let crazies on the left and the right own the conversation. Like, well, no, we should be able to do that. And if we can't, and I fear the firing of that cartoonist. Like, do we even know who that cartoonist was? Was he left? Was he right? Was he anti-Semitic? Does anyone fucking care anymore?
Nope.
It's like, no one. Like you saying it raised the conversation. I worry the conversation that it raised is this one, which is, was the cartoon anti-Semitic, versus the conversation around, like, wait, what is the relationship with Israel's religious right and America? And let's talk about that. Oh, I disagree with that, or I agree with that. That would be a great conversation, rather than, like, it's anti-Semitic. No, it's not. It's like, what the fuck? Now we're actually not talking about the content of the cartoon. We're talking about the, like, can you draw that cartoon? And that's where I worry. It's like, it's a conversation about a conversation, where, like, we never have the real one.
No, and okay, all that, again, if you go by social media and whatever, I mean,
yeah.
Especially Twitter.
Yeah, we shouldn't.
Yeah, but, you know, again, like, you tried starting a conversation on your terms. You know, like, can we draw a cartoon that's critical of the religious right in Israel that you wouldn't consider anti-Semitic? Now, you know, like I said, and that's a way to start this conversation. It's, you know, like, what can you think of something smaller than a cartoon, right? You can't. So let's, you know, frame the conversations that way. When I'm saying let's have these conversations, like, okay, everyone should seek out reasonable conversation, but we're not having that. This is part of the problem, is everyone is going to the extreme of everything. Like, you know, if I question the fact that, you know, should a trans woman compete against biological females? Yeah. Oh my God, are you invalidating my right to exist as a trans person? No, I'm just asking a question, right? It's, everyone wants to, I think and I'm guilty of it, but I think we're all looking for, somehow or other, we're gotten so sensitive, we want to find the worst possible interpretation of what that person is saying and criticize that instead of the actual argument they're making.
Right. And that's well put to what I think, like, making the worst possible interpretation of the cartoonist who draws that, of, like, he picked a dog because he's a Nazi and he really loves the Nazi propaganda of Jews and dogs. Like, no, like, probably fucking not. Like, give the guy a break. He's a cartoonist. And then, because maybe the better argument to not do that tactic is like, he probably didn't know, or even if he did know, maybe he underestimated how irresponsible or dangerous it might be to use the dog because of this, like, Nazi thing. So, you know, then he made a mistake and it was sloppy and irresponsible, and he should be more responsible as a cartoonist. But he's not anti-Semitic. You know what I mean? Like that would be, I don't even agree with what I just said, but that would be a fairer way to assess that cartoon in the motherfucking New York Times. If we think the New York Times is now anti-Semitic, if we're gonna, like, what do you have left? We're gonna be reading, like, where are you going? The left is tearing itself down. That the New York Times is getting accused of this kind of thing with these kind of bad intentions, like you Nazis, like,
okay,
Jesus.
I'll give you another one that's totally off topic here, but it's kind of is. So it was right after the royal baby was recently born there. Whatever, I can't even remember. I don't even know the names of people.
Yeah, but the monkey picture.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the guy had no clue what he was doing. He was just some old guy that put out a, you know, and it was like, oh, they welcomed the royal baby, and, like,
yeah. Freaking out about that. Yeah.
And it's just, I mean,
there's there's two responses. It's one, he's a racist and he did this and he knew what he was doing because he hates black people and thinks they're the same as monkeys. Or two, he was unaware of, as he said, like, even I think his apology was overkill, but apologized because he was, like, unaware of the particular symbol and its relationship with sort of racist tropes, and apologizes if it, like, upset anyone or triggered anyone. And clearly the intention of his joke was to point out the absurdity of the royal family and that anyone gives a shit, because that's his entire career, has been poking fun at, like, the royalty and pomp and circumstance. So you think suddenly he became, like, a raging racist at this one moment. It's like, yeah, the fact that we're not giving anyone the benefit of the doubt that maybe they were unaware of a thing, and then even if you were aware of it, being like, yeah, I was aware that like there's this trope out there of black people as monkeys, but like, come on, get over it, like anything was a big deal. And then you could have a disagreement of being like, no, it's actually a big deal, and you could have a big disagreement about, you know, that symbol in particular and using it or not, which is where I would love the conversation about that I was trying to force about that cartoon of like, stop just calling the cartoonist anti-Semitic. Why is the cartoon anti-Semitic? Let's talk about it. And then people are like paralyzed, and it's like, oh, the dog, I think. Like, it's like, okay, like what are we talking about then there? Like, let's get down to like, okay, forget the intentions. If you think this is anti-Semitic, and the author of it may have been unaware of those things, okay, now we're talking about the symbols, and then we're talking about whether it really matters, etc., which are better conversations, honestly.
Yeah, and then like I said, like at this point, I think we're just repeating the same thing, so we should wrap it up. But yeah, it's all that.
I mean, we could come up with more and more examples of this. I could throw one more that's even more absurd. Do you remember the one where the guy said he was trying to say Martin Luther King Jr. Park on the news, and he clearly accidentally said like Martin Coon Jr. Park?
Martin Luther Coon, yeah.
Yeah, and clearly this was just like a misstep. He said it quickly. It's easy to trip over your own words, and people like assume this guy who's probably led like a totally normal life and is like a whatever. Now he's a racist. Like that accident becoming like, oh, you're done. Like you can imagine someone like Kane like yanking him off stage on the side, being like, oh, racist, we got him. It's like, well, what are you talking about? Okay,
I mean, I'll give you two examples. One that I did recently, and it was just a joke, and I just got people laughed at it. I didn't get any. I said, it was at the end of Game of Thrones. I said, Bran was a diversity hire? So what? Am I being ableist? Am I being anti? Handy, like, no, I'm not. I was making a stupid joke because I was, it's just, that's all it was. But there's one thing I said, like, we are getting so sensitive that, like, there's that condition people have where they feel physical pain from sunlight.
Yeah.
Right. And it's very, very rare. I mean, the only reason I knew about it was there's this family from South Africa that was being deported from Canada because their children had it and they were living there, and there was something going on with their claim. And this is, so I said, okay, it's gotten to the point where if I say it's a nice sunny day outside, it's beautiful, that someone who has that condition can then accuse me of hate speech.
Yeah. Well,
I took it to a very extreme, but it's getting, and so like the same thing with that cartoon. I think what you're talking about is the more important thing around that cartoon, like, is the criticism of Israel now automatically anti-Semitic? Not whether that cartoon was anti-Semitic, not whether the guy
of it anti-Semitic.
Yeah, exactly. But even if he was, and it's a valid criticism, like, I'm trying to think of, like I couldn't think of anything Bin Laden said that would be valid criticism, or or Baghdadi. But let's just say they did make some sort of valid criticism.
Right.
And I said, okay, you know what? This is a valid criticism. Does that mean I support Bin Laden, or I don't think he has all these other, horrible beliefs? No, it doesn't. I'm just, this one thing. So even if this guy was anti-Semitic and he made a valid criticism, let's talk about the criticism and what it's doing.
Sure. No, I think to wrap it up, you're like talking about it a bit now. That thing you put on Twitter this morning of the Chinese proverb with the three faces. I'm reading it now. Like, one for the public, one for our closest friends, and one just for ourselves. The answer will fluctuate between those faces for all people, and that score will change for each of these faces. And I responded being like, I think you're actually on to, and I was like, which one's the Twitter face? I think you're actually on to something pretty profound there. I would love for you to like expound on that, or a psychologist to like really dig into that. Because I think what we're really putting our finger on here is this hunch that no one really, really gives a shit that the guy said Martin Coon Jr. Park by accident. But on Twitter, this weird face that we show on social media is this weird combination that is getting like ramped up in this crazy, we could call it virtue signaling, but that's almost far too simple because I feel like that's been used as too much of a sledgehammer as well. But I don't know what that face is on social media that like demands to pretend to be outraged and care. John Ronson wrote that great book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed, which went through all these famous cases. There's this hunch that it's like, does anyone actually really care about that thing? And you're right, you'll probably find that one person. But most people are like, I don't care. This phenomenon of being offended for people who aren't offended themselves, like on behalf of them.
Exactly. I started calling that victimhood appropriation.
Yeah.
Like
well, it's happening with Jews, and I want to warn the ex-Muslims who are worried about that anti-Semitic cartoon. There might be some who really are really upset about it, who are really like freaking out about it and doing this stuff. Maybe Barry Weiss is one of them. We'll see what her book is about. I don't know. But there's a whole fucking lot of them like me looking around being like, I don't fucking care. I criticize Israel. And I need to be able to do that because I actually consider the ability not to do that as a threat to Jews and a threat to Judaism. So if you really care about that you should. So I think there's a bit of that going on where there's an appropriation of my victimhood that I do not hold. So
okay, and I get that, and I mean, actually talking to you today, I've changed. I shouldn't say changed because I was mostly in your camp, but I see more where you're coming from, and I think equating it to the Islamophobia thing would be a good way to get ex-Muslims, or even not just ex-Muslim people who criticize Islam, but will then shit on you for criticizing Israel. Maybe it's a good way to get them to understand that.
That's fair, and then as always, I try to steelman the best argument against me, which I think I've given as well. Of there is a calculus to be like, listen, Jay, we get your point, but you're underestimating this other kind of danger. So the cost of not criticizing those religious Jews and the harm that it's literally doing all over the world, and particularly in the West Bank, we're going to accept that harm because if we do allow this criticism, there is no responsible way to do the criticism that won't incite this thing that's much more dangerous. If that's the calculus, I'm on board. Convince me, cool, good, I'll shut up, good. But that's the best argument. The bad argument is it's anti-Semitic, and so is the New York Times, and so is the guy who did it, and it's rising everywhere, and we're all fucked. That's the bad argument. I won't accept it, and I won't engage with it. And if Jews want to make it too, I will push back on them. It would be like the Muslims pushing back on the other Muslims, being like, listen, not every criticism of Islam is invalid and just because they hate brown people. Not every criticism of this is because Jews are just always hated. I'm sure if anyone's gotten to the very end of this very long interview and has grown up like me, I'm not unique, like I said. You will have heard this your entire life. We're all familiar with the ADL calling foul on everything, and they appear to have won the microphone. That's, I think, a problem.
Yeah, and on that note, I think we should cut this.
We should probably. It's been about 2.5 hours.
Anyways, thank you everyone for listening, and I'll be back.